The air at the bustling airport was thick with the usual chaos. People hurrying to their gates, flight announcements blaring over the loudspeakers, and the smell of overpriced coffee wafting from every corner. Amidst the noise, one figure stood out, not because of his appearance, but because of his presence. Elon Musk, the billionaire inventor, was in the terminal, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd as he briskly walked toward the security check. But today was not going to be like any other travel day for Elon. He had no idea that a simple misunderstanding would spark a series of events that would lead to a public spectacle, a mistake that no one would soon forget. As he approached the security checkpoint, the usual tight-lipped TSA agents barely noticed him. They were busy dealing with a large group of passengers, but one agent, Sarah, happened to glance up just in time. Her eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion creeping in. She saw someone who looked out of place, a man in a black hoodie, his face partially obscured by sunglasses and a mask. He was standing too still for someone who was about to board a flight. "Sir, I need you to step aside," Sarah said in a firm but polite tone, signaling for him to move away from the line. Elon blinked in confusion, taken aback by the abruptness. He wasn't accustomed to being treated this way. His frustration flared slightly, but he did his best to keep his voice steady. "I'm just trying to get through security. I have a flight to catch." But Sarah wasn't having it. She had been trained to follow the rules, no exceptions. "Please, step over here, sir. I need to verify some things." There was a pause. Elon glanced around, realizing the situation was escalating. He could feel the eyes of other passengers on him, the murmurs starting to rise. Some were curious, others confused, but all were watching closely. "Is there a problem here?" Another TSA agent, Mike, asked, approaching the scene. Sarah turned to him. "This man is acting suspicious. I've asked him to step aside, but he's refusing to cooperate. We need to check his ID." Elon's patience was wearing thin. "I don't know what you think I've done, but I'm not a threat. I'm Elon Musk. I'm just trying to catch a flight." A few passengers nearby looked over in surprise. Elon Musk? The name sounded familiar to them, but in the hustle and bustle of the airport, it was easy to dismiss as someone else. Sarah, however, didn't seem to recognize him. "Sir, I'm going to need you to follow protocol and come with me. We're not having this discussion here." The air was thick with tension now. Elon was no stranger to being questioned or even challenged, but this was different. He felt a flicker of annoyance, but more than that, a deep sense of disbelief. This was happening to him? At his airport? Of all places, how was it possible that someone didn't recognize him? That thought only added fuel to the fire. As Sarah began leading him away from the security line, the murmurs around the terminal grew louder. People were pulling out their phones, recording the interaction, unsure of what was going on but all too eager to document the drama unfolding. Elon tried to remain calm, but every step he took away from the security area felt more surreal. A few moments passed, and the situation grew even more uncomfortable. Elon's mind raced, wondering how to handle this. Could he demand to speak to a manager? Should he just let it go? The latter option didn't sit well with him. Not today. Suddenly, the voice of a woman cut through the chaos, her tone unmistakably calm and confident, yet filled with authority. "Sarah, what's going on here?" Everyone turned. Enter Maye Musk, Elon's mother, and the woman who had raised one of the most famous entrepreneurs of the 21st century. Standing tall and poised, Maye exuded an air of calm that immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room. She knew exactly what had been happening before she even asked. Sarah, who had been so sure of her decision just moments before, hesitated. I'm just doing my job," she stammered, her face flushing a little. "This man is refusing to cooperate, and I was just trying to—" Maye cut her off, her voice gentle but firm. "Sarah, you've made a mistake." For a moment, Sarah simply stared at Maye, trying to make sense of the situation. It wasn't until Maye leaned closer and spoke more softly that Sarah finally understood what had just happened. "That man is Elon Musk. He doesn't need to follow the same procedures as everyone else. He's not some random passenger," Maye continued, her voice carrying the weight of authority and compassion, something she had mastered over the years, whether dealing with her son or the many business deals she'd been a part of. Sarah's face drained of color. Oh my God, I didn't realize. The other TSA agents around them were beginning to sense the gravity of the situation. Elon, despite the shock of being mishandled, felt a sense of relief wash over him as his mother stepped in. Can you please get the manager? May asked calmly. A few moments later, the airport manager arrived. The whole situation had reached a point where it was impossible to ignore. May explained the misunderstanding, and the manager, now realizing the mistake, apologized profusely. The crowd that had gathered in the terminal continued to watch, some recording, some merely curious. Elon, still visibly frustrated, took a deep breath. "It's fine," he muttered, though his voice was still laced with annoyance. He wasn't one to let such things slide, but in that moment, the embarrassment of being treated like a criminal, when all he wanted was to catch his flight, was overwhelming. The manager turned to him, offering a sincere apology. "I'm sorry, Mr. Musk. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. We'll clear up the situation immediately." Elon gave a tight nod, but his mind wasn't entirely in the moment. He simply wanted to put this whole thing behind him. May, ever the composed one, placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, Elon. Let's just get you to your gate. This won't ruin your day." As the two walked toward the gate, the tension slowly began to fade, though the ripple effects of the incident would soon be felt by everyone involved. It was a strange, unsettling moment, but one that would change things for everyone, not just for Elon Musk. The airport was a kingdom of rules. Every sign, every announcement, every line that stretched across the floor, each had a purpose: to keep the passengers safe, secure, and moving in the right direction. In the midst of this order, there were few things more rigid than the unspoken law of the terminal. The workers were in charge, and the passengers were just passing through. Sarah had always believed in this order. She took pride in her role at the TSA, her job to ensure that the chaos of a busy airport didn't spill over into something far worse. To her, the rules were simple, black and white. Follow the procedures, and everything would go smoothly. Deviate even a little, and you'd find yourself being escorted out of the system. This was why she had reacted the way she did when she first spotted Elon Musk. It wasn't that she had known who he was. She didn't recognize him from the countless news articles or the numerous pictures of him across social media. All she saw was a man who, in her mind, didn't quite belong. He was standing in the security line, wearing a black hoodie, his face hidden by sunglasses and a mask. He didn't seem to fit the typical traveler. Something about his posture, his movement, set off an internal alarm that Sarah had learned to trust. Sarah was trained to be cautious, not to take chances. In the world of airport security, suspicion was the first step toward preventing something worse. If she didn't follow the rules, if she allowed just one slip, who knew what could happen? She had seen enough news reports, heard enough stories, to know that one small misstep could lead to chaos. It wasn't personal. It was just part of the job. As she had led Elon away from the security line, a cold sense of certainty had settled in her chest. She was doing what needed to be done. She had to verify his identity, follow the protocol. After all, it was better to be safe than sorry. But as she looked at Elon's face, his frustration mounting with every passing second, something about the whole situation began to feel off. The man was important. She could see that in the way people had started to murmur when his name was mentioned. The crowd was no longer indifferent. They were watching. But Sarah had committed herself to the idea that rules were all that mattered. It didn't matter who he was or what he had accomplished. She had a job to do, and she was going to do it. However, as Maye Musk stepped into the scene, everything changed. May's presence was undeniable. She wasn't just any bystander. The elegance and authority with which she moved through the terminal spoke volumes. Even though Sarah was still processing the gravity of the situation, she couldn't help but feel a shift in the atmosphere. The air became thicker, charged with the awareness that this was no ordinary conversation unfolding before her. When May had revealed Elon's identity, Sarah had been stunned. She had always been proud of her attention to detail, of her ability to spot potential threats, but in this case, her instincts had failed her completely. She had underestimated the situation, assuming a man like Elon Musk would blend into the crowd like any other passenger. But he didn't. She could feel the flush creeping up her neck as she processed what had just occurred. She had asked him to leave. The man she had just kicked out of line, the one she had treated like a common troublemaker, was one of the wealthiest, most influential people in the world. She had seen the Twitter posts, read the news articles about his latest ventures into space, his plans to revolutionize electric cars. Yet, in that moment, she had been completely oblivious. For Sarah, it wasn't about the rules anymore. It was about the realization that she had made a massive mistake, one that, even with an apology, would be difficult to undo. As Elon and Maye walked toward the gate, Sarah stood frozen in place. Her colleagues, who had observed the exchange, shared the same stunned silence. They, too, were processing the weight of what had just happened. Mike, the other TSA agent who had been standing nearby when Sarah had pulled Elon aside, gave her a long look. "What the hell just happened?" he asked quietly, his voice laced with disbelief. I messed up," Sarah muttered, her face pale. "I didn't realize who he was. I just saw someone who didn't look like he was following the rules. I thought I was doing the right thing." She paused, rubbing her forehead, her mind swirling with embarrassment. "I just kicked out Elon Musk. I can't believe it." Mike, who had been in the business long enough to know how things worked, let out a sigh. "We all make mistakes. But this one's going to follow you around." Sarah knew he was right. This wasn't a minor slip-up. Kicking out someone like Elon Musk was not something you could easily walk away from. The word would get out, and the video clips would spread across social media. She could already imagine the headlines: "TSA agent kicks out billionaire Elon Musk." As she watched Elon disappear into the distance with Maye, a sense of dread began to settle in. Her reputation was shot. There was no way to undo the damage that had been done. The rules that she had clung to so tightly now felt like shackles, trapping her in a situation she could never have anticipated. Meanwhile, Elon and Maye reached the gate in silence. Elon's frustration still lingered in the air, but May's presence seemed to soothe the tension between them. They had been through worse, after all. This was just another chapter in their complicated relationship with the world. "Don't let it bother you, Elon," Maye said softly as they sat down in the waiting area. "It's just a mistake. People make mistakes. Even the people who are supposed to keep us safe." Elon rubbed his temples. "I just don't get it. I've been in airports 1,000 times. People have asked for my ID, sure, but never like that. Never with that hostility." Maye smiled gently, her eyes full of understanding. "You know, sometimes people just don't recognize what's in front of them. They don't realize who you are. But that doesn't change anything about you or your worth." Elon looked at her, the weariness finally starting to lift from his shoulders. "Yeah, I know, but it's the principle of it. I was trying to do something normal, something anyone else would do, and it turned into a spectacle." Maye chuckled, her voice light. "Welcome to the world, darling. Spectacles happen, and sometimes they don't go the way we expect. But they do teach us something." Elon raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what exactly did this teach me?" Maye leaned back, looking around the terminal, a knowing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It taught you that even the best of us can slip up. But more importantly, it taught you how little anyone really understands the rules of the world until they've been inside the game for long enough." Elon stared at her for a moment, the lesson settling in. He'd learned a lot about the power of perception in his own career, but this was a different kind of lesson, a lesson in humility. The flight would still be waiting for them, but Elon knew, now more than ever, that the true game was played far beyond the rules that governed airports. The flight was smooth, a welcome break after the drama that had unfolded earlier. Elon Musk, despite his frustration, managed to settle into the seat next to his mother. Maye Musk sat across from him, her eyes scanning a magazine, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. She had always been one to observe, to think deeply about the things people didn't say. And right now, she was thinking about Elon. He'd been through a lot in his life, both in the public eye and behind closed doors, but something about the incident at the airport had hit him harder than usual. He wasn't just annoyed by the misunderstanding, he was shaken by it. The incident had been a stark reminder of how disconnected people often were from the realities of his world. As a billionaire, inventor, and visionary, Elon had spent years building a life that, for better or worse, put him in a position that few could understand. But even he couldn't have predicted how a simple trip through airport security would bring that disconnect into sharp focus. May closed her magazine and looked over at her son. "You're quiet," she said softly. "Something still bothering you?" Elon didn't immediately respond. Instead, he stared out of the window, watching the clouds roll by beneath them. His mind was a whirlwind, torn between irritation, disbelief, and a touch of helplessness. He hated feeling helpless, especially when he was in the right. "I'm just thinking," he said finally, his voice distant. "It's not the fact that they didn't recognize me. It's the fact that the system is so rigid, so mechanical, that even someone like me can be reduced to a number, a face in a crowd." He paused, his hands clenched on his lap. What happens when you stop being seen as a person and are just another cog in the machine? May nodded thoughtfully, her fingers gently tapping the armrest. "I understand that feeling. The world has a funny way of stripping you of your individuality. But you've always been different, Elon. You never really fit into the mold that society tries to put everyone in. Maybe that's why it hurts so much when people try to force you into it." Elon's lips twisted into a half-smile, but the sentiment hit home. His whole life had been spent shattering molds, creating his own path. He had always been the outsider, the person who didn't follow conventional wisdom. Whether it was his ambition to send humans to Mars or his obsession with sustainable energy, he had never been someone who played by the rules. But to be treated like just another face in a crowd? It felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked for. "I guess I've never been good at fitting in," Elon muttered, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "But today, it felt like the world just wanted to remind me of that." May smiled softly, her eyes crinkling with affection. "That's the thing, darling. The world doesn't have to understand you. What matters is that you understand yourself. And the people who matter, they'll get it." Elon's frown deepened. He wasn't so sure about that. But there was something comforting about his mother's words. Even if the world didn't understand, he could always rely on May. She had been there through everything, from his awkward teenage years in South Africa to his rise to prominence with PayPal, Tesla, and SpaceX. She had never once treated him like a failure, even when the odds were stacked against him. Her belief in him had never wavered. Just then, the flight attendant came over the intercom, announcing their approach to their destination. Elon and May shared a quiet glance, and Elon finally leaned back in his seat, exhaling deeply. The incident at the airport was behind him, for now, but something told him that the ripples of that moment were far from over. As the plane touched down, Elon's mind wandered back to the airport. The incident had already gone viral. Everyone had a phone, and videos of the confrontation were being shared on social media. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show Sarah's stern demeanor as she led him away. The headline from the news outlets would write itself: "Elon Musk kicked out of airport by TSA agent." Elon had never been one to shy away from controversy, but this time, it felt different. There was no great achievement attached to this moment, no groundbreaking project or world-changing innovation. It was just a simple mistake, a misunderstanding, but it was a mistake that had cast a shadow over him. People were already making assumptions about what had happened, and he couldn't help but wonder how it would affect his reputation. When they got off the plane, May noticed his distant demeanor. "You're still brooding, huh?" she asked, though there was no judgment in her voice. It was just an observation. Elon shrugged, adjusting the collar of his jacket. "I'm just thinking about everything. I mean, what do people see when they look at me? They don't see the guy who spends hours thinking about the future. They see the billionaire who can afford anything, who's always in control. But they don't see the human being underneath it all." May chuckled softly. "Ah, yes, the curse of fame. Everyone wants a piece of you, but few want to understand you." They walked out of the terminal, the cool breeze hitting their faces as they stepped into the late afternoon light. Elon's thoughts remained clouded, but there was a shift within him. He knew that the incident would blow over. It always did. People would forget, or at least move on to the next viral moment. But the way he felt about it, that feeling of being misunderstood, even by those who were supposed to protect him, would linger for a while. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Sarah was having a very different experience. The day after the incident, She came into work and was immediately pulled into a meeting with her supervisor. The mood was tense. The manager was there too, his face grim as he motioned for Sarah to sit down. "Sarah," her supervisor began, his voice steady but stern, "I need you to explain what happened yesterday. The incident with Elon Musk. What exactly went wrong?" Sarah felt the weight of the question pressing down on her chest. She had been dreading this moment ever since she had left her shift yesterday. I don't know how it happened," she stammered. "I saw him, and he just didn't fit the profile of a typical traveler. I acted on instinct, but I didn't realize who he was." The manager nodded slowly, his expression hard to read. "You acted without verifying his identity. You've been trained to follow protocol, but you skipped steps. That's not acceptable." Sarah's heart sank. She knew this was coming. She had made a mistake, a big one, and now she had to face the consequences. The footage of her questioning Elon Musk had gone viral, and it was all over the news. It wasn't just about the mistake anymore. It was about the way she was portrayed, the way the public was now judging her. Her supervisor leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You know how serious this is, right? We've had complaints. The media is already calling for accountability. There are rumors that Elon Musk himself is upset with the way things were handled." Sarah's stomach twisted. She had never wanted to be in the spotlight, let alone for something like this. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just doing my job." Her supervisor didn't say anything at first. Instead, he sat back, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him. Finally, he spoke. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. You've messed up, but we're going to do what we can to minimize the fallout. You need to apologize, not just to Elon Musk, but to everyone involved. You'll have to take responsibility for your actions." The tension in Sarah's chest was unbearable as she sat in her supervisor's office. The meeting had barely begun, but the weight of her mistake already pressed on her like 1,000 pounds. She had been through enough tough situations in her life to know that this one wasn't going to be easy to shake off. Her supervisor, Marcus, leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he looked at her, considering his next words. His tone was measured, but the undertone was clear. This was serious. "Sarah, this isn't just about you making a mistake. It's about public perception, and right now, the airport is under fire. Your actions are being scrutinized, and there's already talk about how the incident reflects poorly on us." Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. She had been expecting this. The video was everywhere. The internet, the news, social media. They had all latched onto the story, each with a different spin. Some laughed at her for not recognizing Elon Musk. Others scolded her for being too harsh. It didn't matter which side of the story people took. The fact remained that she had failed in a critical moment, and now, the fallout was real. "I understand, Marcus," she said quietly, her eyes dropping to her lap. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was just doing my job." He exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated. "I know you were trying to do your job, Sarah, but this goes beyond just following the rules. You need to take responsibility for how you handled it. We can't pretend it didn't happen. So, here's what we're going to do." Marcus slid a piece of paper across the table toward her. She glanced at it, the words printed in neat, professional type. "This is an apology," he continued. "We've been in contact with Musk's team, and they're requesting a formal apology from you. I need you to sign it, and we'll send it over today. It's the least we can do to begin mending this situation." Sarah's heart sank. She had expected this, but signing the paper felt like a confession, an admission that her mistake wasn't just a small error in judgment, but a colossal misstep in the public eye. There was no escaping it now. I don't know if I can do that," Sarah muttered, staring at the letter, her mind racing. "What if it's not enough? What if it doesn't make a difference?" "Then you'll have to live with it," Marcus said bluntly. "But if you want to keep your job, you have to own up to it. If you want to salvage your career here, you'll need to show you're capable of taking responsibility." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the sting of his words. She was already trying to come to terms with the consequences of her actions, but this was a whole new level. If she apologized publicly, if Elon Musk's team accepted her apology, Would that truly fix anything? Would she ever be seen the same way again? Meanwhile, Elon was sitting in a luxurious lounge at another airport, checking his phone. His inbox was flooded with messages, some from friends, others from his PR team, about the TSA incident. His team had already made their calls to the airport, seeking clarification and even offering to help smooth things over. But Elon, for the first time in a while, didn't feel like handling the situation with his usual cool-headedness. The whole thing had been irritating, yes, but it also struck a deeper chord. The idea that he could be reduced to just another passenger was unsettling. He was a man who had spent years cultivating a public image of being larger than life, a visionary, a leader in technology, and someone who was changing the world. Yet here he was, shuffled out of line, treated like any other unknown traveler, simply because of a single security agent's lapse in judgment. Maye, who had been silently observing her son as he scrolled through his phone, finally spoke up. "You know, darling, this won't be the first time people misunderstand you, and it won't be the last. You can let it eat away at you, or you can let it go." Elon paused and looked up at her, his brow furrowed. "It's not that easy. It's not about the mistake anymore. It's about how it was handled. People are watching, Maye, and the way I was treated, like I was some faceless, anonymous person, that stings. Even I'm human." Maye smiled, though it was a sad, knowing smile. "Of course you're human. We all are. But the thing about being someone like you, Elon, is that people will always try to put you in a box, label you, and reduce you to whatever suits their narrative. But that's not who you are. You're more than that." Elon sighed, staring out the window at the tarmac below. "I just wish I could get people to see that. Not as a headline or a symbol, but as a person." Maye nodded, her voice soft but resolute. "Then maybe it's time to show them. Maybe you need to take the first step." Later that afternoon, Sarah stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of her uniform, her mind still racing. She had just signed the apology letter, and now, she was waiting to find out if it would be enough to quiet the storm. She was doing the right thing. She had to keep reminding herself of that. She was taking responsibility, owning her mistake. But what if it wasn't enough? What if it just wasn't enough for Elon Musk and the millions who were now watching her? The thought of seeing her name splashed across headlines in the same breath as Elon Musk made her stomach churn. She had seen the comments online, the ridicule, the memes, the mockery. Her career, her reputation, her future. It all felt like it was hanging in the balance. She could only hope that the apology would smooth things over, even if it meant swallowing her pride. Her phone buzzed, breaking her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. A new email from her supervisor. She opened it, expecting to see a confirmation of her apology being sent to Musk's team. Instead, she froze. The email was brief. "Sarah, I just received word from Musk's PR team. They've asked for a personal apology. They want to speak with you directly. I suggest you reach out immediately." Her hands began to shake. A personal apology? The gravity of the situation hit her all at once. What did this mean? Elon Musk himself wanted to hear from her? What could she possibly say to make up for everything? She wasn't prepared for this. She didn't know how to apologize to a man who had made a name for himself by defying the rules and reshaping the future. How could she possibly make him understand that she had never meant for it to escalate the way it had? Suddenly, the weight of the moment pressed down on her like never before. She couldn't hide behind her uniform, behind her protocols, behind the rules anymore. She was facing a man who had the power to change the world, and she had to figure out how to speak to him, not as a TSA agent, but as someone trying to make things right. The following morning, Elon sat in the quiet of his office at SpaceX, a cup of coffee cooling by his side as he absently scrolled through the news. Headlines were still buzzing with the story from the airport. The memes, the viral videos, the reactions, it was a full-on media circus. Despite all his successes and breakthroughs, one tiny, unremarkable moment at an airport had thrown his personal life into the kind of chaos he wasn't used to. He sighed and pushed the phone aside. He was done trying to ignore it. He had a decision to make, and he wasn't going to let his public relations team or anyone else dictate how he handled it. It was time to face it head-on. Maye, as usual, knew exactly what he was thinking. She'd been watching him from the doorway for a moment before speaking. "You've been quiet all morning," she said, stepping inside with her calm, steady presence. "Something on your mind?" Elon lifted his eyes to meet hers, his face drawn. "I think I need to make this right. For her." For a moment, May didn't say anything. She simply walked over to him, her footsteps gentle but firm, and sat down in the chair across from his desk. Her expression was knowing, as if she had anticipated this moment for a while. "You know," she began slowly, "it's easy to think of your world as separate from the rest. But sometimes, things have a way of reminding us how interconnected we all are. A few minutes, a small encounter, it can change everything. This moment at the airport, it's not just about you and her, Elon. It's about the bigger picture, about perception, humility, and understanding." Elon stared at the coffee in his mug, the swirling black liquid offering no answers. "I never meant to make this a public spectacle. It was just a misunderstanding. But it got out of control. Now, it's on me to fix it." May's gaze softened. "And you will. But how you choose to handle it will show everyone who you are. Not the billionaire, not the innovator, but you, the person." Elon nodded, but his thoughts were already on the next step. "I need to talk to Sarah. I need to hear her side of it. Maybe she didn't know who I was. Maybe it was all just protocol. But I can't move on without understanding where we both stand." May smiled gently, placing a hand on his arm. "If you want to truly understand, you'll have to listen, not just react. You've never been good at that, have you?" Her voice was playful but filled with the weight of years of experience with him. He chuckled dryly, but the thought of actually reaching out to Sarah gave him a strange sense of trepidation. What if she didn't want to hear from him? What if she saw him as just another entitled rich guy trying to cover his tracks? Still, there was something deep inside him telling him to reach out, to set the record straight. He wasn't just Elon Musk. He was a human being, and this moment was one where his humanity would be tested. Meanwhile, Sarah was standing in the small, sterile break room of the airport, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She had received the email from Marcus early that morning, telling her that Elon Musk's team wanted to speak with her directly. At first, she had thought it was some kind of joke, a misunderstanding. But now, with the reality of it sinking in, her mind was racing. The apology letter she had signed the day before felt like a distant memory now. She had done her part, but this was different. A personal conversation? With Elon Musk, of all people? She didn't even know where to begin. How could she possibly explain herself? What could she say that would undo the damage, that would make everything okay? She had seen the news coverage, the memes that had circulated, and the comments that ranged from mocking to sympathetic. But no matter how much she tried to detach from it, the weight of the situation pressed on her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't know if it was her reputation she was worried about, or the very real possibility that she'd been misunderstood by someone whose opinions mattered far more than she had ever imagined. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced down at the screen. Elon Musk's team, meeting request. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the message for a moment, unsure whether to reply immediately or to give herself some time to process. She glanced at the clock on the wall, realizing she was due back to work soon. She had no choice but to respond. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm available today at 3 p.m. Would that work?" Her fingers hovered over the screen as she sent the message, her heart pounding in her chest. It was done now. There was no turning back. Elon didn't wait long to respond. By the time Sarah received his confirmation message for their meeting, he was already on his way to the airport. His PR team had arranged for a private meeting room, a quiet place where they could speak without distractions. He wasn't sure exactly what he was going to say to Sarah, but he knew it was important to handle it carefully. This wasn't about saving face. This was about making the right choice for once. When he arrived at the airport, he was met by his team, and they led him to the meeting room. Elon stood there for a moment, staring out the window at the bustle of the terminal below. Everything seemed so normal, so everyday. And yet, his mind was far from calm. This meeting with Sarah was about more than just an apology. It was about understanding. Understanding what had gone wrong, what had led them both to this point, and how they could both move forward. At exactly 3 p.m., Sarah arrived at the meeting room, her heart pounding so loudly in her chest she could hear it echoing in her ears. She took a deep breath before pushing the door open, steeling herself for what lay beyond. There he was, Elon Musk, sitting at a conference table, looking much less like the larger-than-life figure she had seen on television and more like a man simply waiting for an answer. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly warm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Her throat went dry, but she forced herself to respond. "Of course, Mr. Musk. I wanted to apologize. I never intended for what happened to escalate the way it did." Elon nodded, but he didn't immediately speak. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat. We're both here because we're trying to understand what went wrong, what happened that day, and what we can do about it." Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then sat down. The distance between them seemed vast, but she focused on his words. They were kind, direct, not the tone she had expected. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. "I guess it all started when I didn't recognize who you were," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "I was just doing my job, following the protocols I was trained to follow. But I didn't take the extra step to verify your identity. I acted too quickly, and I'm sorry." Elon leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him. "I understand. In the moment, I can see how it must have seemed like just another traveler going through security. But this is the part one need to understand. Why did you treat me the way you did? Why was I pulled aside so aggressively?" Sarah winced, the question cutting deeper than she had anticipated. "I thought you were someone trying to avoid the rules. I wasn't being malicious, just trying to protect the security of the airport. But in the process, I was wrong." Elon sat back, nodding slowly. "I get it. You did what you thought was right. But I think there's a deeper issue here. Something about how we all see each other. You, me, everyone. We're more than just our roles, our titles, our jobs. We're human." Sarah's eyes met his, and for the first time in this whole ordeal, she truly understood what he was saying. "We're all human," she repeated softly, almost to herself. Elon smiled faintly, and for a moment, the tension between them dissolved. "Exactly. And that's why I wanted to meet with you. Not because I'm Elon Musk, but because I'm a person who wants to make things right." The air in the room seemed to shift. The weight of their conversation didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like the beginning of something new. The room felt heavier than it had before. Elon and Sarah sat across from each other, their initial awkwardness now replaced by a tentative understanding. The air wasn't thick with tension anymore, but rather with the weight of the conversation they were having. Sarah could hardly believe that she was sitting in front of Elon Musk, having an actual conversation with him. Not about SpaceX, Tesla, or any of the groundbreaking innovations that had made him a household name, but about something deeply personal, about the mistake she had made, and the way they both found themselves tangled in the mess it created. Elon broke the silence first, his voice calm and deliberate. "You know, I don't think people really get it," he said, looking at her earnestly. "What it's like to be in your shoes, doing a job where you're constantly under scrutiny, but at the same time, trying to make the right call, even when you don't have all the information." Sarah blinked, surprised by his insight. "I never thought about it like that," she admitted. "I guess I just saw you as, well, a public figure. A person everyone recognizes. I didn't stop to think that maybe you were just another person trying to get through the day." Elon chuckled softly, a rare sound that made Sarah realize he was, in fact, capable of being disarmingly normal. "I am just another person. But when you're me, people often forget that. Sometimes I want to be treated like anyone else, but I also don't get that luxury." Sarah nodded, trying to process what he was saying. "I get that now. I didn't mean to single you out, to make you feel less human. But I was just following procedure, doing what I thought was right. And in doing that, I didn't stop to think about how it would make you feel." Elon leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "That's the tricky part, isn't it? We get so caught up in the rules, and what's expected of us, that we forget to look at the bigger picture. We forget to see the person in front of us." There was a pause between them, the unspoken truth hanging in the air. They were both here, both aware of how their actions had collided in the most unexpected way. And now, they were both trying to untangle that collision. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice low. "I didn't mean for it to turn into such a big thing. I just didn't know how to handle it. And now, I feel like I've messed everything up." Elon's gaze softened. "You didn't mess everything up, Sarah. People make mistakes. That's part of life. The important thing is how we move forward from them, how we learn." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a little lighter as his words sank in. "I'll do better next time. I just hope people will understand that I was doing my job, even if it didn't come across the right way." Elon nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I get that. And I think, if people really took the time to listen to both sides of the story, they'd understand too. They'd realize it wasn't just about you not recognizing me. It's about the system we're all in, and how we deal with the pressures that come with it." They sat there for a moment, the weight of their shared experience binding them together in a way that neither had expected. There was no more anger, no more frustration, just a quiet acknowledgement of each other's humanity. "I appreciate you meeting with me, Sarah," Elon said, his voice softer now. "I know this hasn't been easy for you, but I think we've both learned something from this. And for what it's worth, I don't hold any hard feelings." Sarah smiled, her relief evident. "Thank you, Mr. Musk. That means more than you know." A few days later, the media storm surrounding the incident at the airport had mostly settled, but the ripple effects were still felt in unexpected ways. Sarah found herself walking through the terminal with a renewed sense of purpose, her head held a little higher, her shoulders a little straighter. The apology, the meeting with Elon, and the understanding that had followed had given her a sense of closure she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about regaining her job or her reputation. It was about finding peace within herself. It was about knowing that she had done the right thing, and that mistakes, no matter how big, didn't define who she was. Her phone buzzed as she walked through the airport, and she pulled it from her pocket, expecting it to be another routine work message. But this time, it was a notification from social media, a new tweet from Elon Musk himself. "Big shout out to the TSA agent who made an honest mistake and handled it with grace. We're all human, and we all deserve to be seen as such. #lessons learned." The tweet had thousands of likes and shares within minutes. Her heart skipped a beat. A public acknowledgement from Elon Musk? It was more than she had ever hoped for. She stared at the screen, disbelief settling in. Before she could fully process what was happening, her phone rang. It was Marcus, her supervisor. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice filled with surprise. "There's a story on the news right now about your interaction with Musk, and, well, let's just say it's being covered in a completely different light. The way people are reacting is, well, let's just say it's better than we expected." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. "What do you mean?" "Public opinion is shifting," Marcus explained. "The fact that you were willing to take responsibility, to meet with him in person, it's showing people who you really are. And they're responding to that. It's not about the mistake anymore. It's about the way you handled it." A sense of warmth spread through her chest as she listened to his words. For the first time in days, Sarah felt the tightness in her stomach ease. She wasn't just the TSA agent who made a mistake. She was someone who had learned, someone who had taken accountability and found a way to make things right. Meanwhile, Elon sat in his private jet, scrolling through his phone as he watched the news coverage surrounding the tweet he had sent. The media was finally beginning to understand the situation for what it was, a misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion. He knew his words had made an impact, but there was something else, something deeper that had been sparked by his interaction with Sarah. He had always been driven by his vision for the future, by his passion for technology and exploration. But this experience had reminded him that, at the end of the day, it was the people who mattered most, the ones who would understand the mistakes, the growth, and the humanity in all of us. For a moment, as he looked out the window at the vast expanse of sky, Elon allowed himself a rare, quiet moment of reflection. Maybe, just maybe, this had been the wake-up call he didn't even know he needed. As the days passed, both Sarah and Elon found themselves more deeply connected to the world around them. Their paths had crossed in an unexpected way, but through that encounter, They had both learned something valuable, that mistakes didn't define them, that people were capable of growth, and that the simplest actions, like a genuine apology or a kind word, could change everything. In the end, the incident at the airport had been a wake-up call for both of them, a reminder of the power of empathy, the importance of understanding, and the deep, universal truth that we're all just trying to navigate life as best we can. The ripple effect of Elon Musk's tweet wasn't just a passing moment in the news cycle. It was something much larger. The tweet, which had initially seemed like a simple acknowledgement of an honest mistake, quickly became the centerpiece of a broader conversation. It was as if the world had been waiting for someone to offer a moment of vulnerability, of human connection, and Elon's words did just that. For Sarah, the aftershocks were still being felt days later. Her inbox was flooded with messages, some from well-wishers, others from complete strangers who had shared their own stories of feeling misunderstood or misjudged. The media had also picked up the story, but this time, the narrative was different. The incident at the airport wasn't the scandalous headline it had initially been. It had transformed into a story of personal growth and accountability, both for Sarah and for Elon Musk. Walking into work that morning, Sarah was greeted with an unfamiliar mixture of praise and curiosity. People in the airport lounge and security areas would stop her, give her a smile, and say something like, "I saw the tweet. That was awesome." Even the travelers who passed her by seemed to look at her with a sense of recognition. Not the kind of recognition that came with fear or awkwardness, but one of mutual respect. It was almost as if the whole world had taken a collective sigh of relief and decided to give Sarah a second chance. The feeling of being seen, of not being just a faceless security agent, was both humbling and empowering. But it also came with a sense of pressure. The moment had become bigger than her, bigger than the mistake, bigger than the apology, and certainly bigger than she had ever expected it to be. She knew that people would be watching her more closely now, scrutinizing every move she made. One wrong step and the cycle of judgment would start all over again. At the same time, Elon was experiencing his own version of this newfound spotlight. His decision to publicly support Sarah was being hailed as a rare act of humility. His social media following had increased significantly, and the media outlets were now praising his humanizing actions. But there was also a flip side to this. As he sat in his office at Tesla, reviewing reports on the latest developments with SpaceX, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had somehow opened a door that could never be closed. A door to vulnerability. A door that invited people to expect more from him than just innovative ideas and technological breakthroughs. Elon Musk was used to leading the charge on innovation, but now, it seemed like the world wanted him to lead in matters of empathy, understanding, and connection. It was a challenge he didn't fully understand, but one he was unwilling to ignore. Later that day, Elon found himself on another flight, this time to a tech summit in Silicon Valley. As the plane ascended, he stared out of the window, his thoughts drifting back to his conversation with Sarah. She had been kind and composed, but the weight of their conversation still lingered in his mind. There was something about her, something about the way she handled the situation, that had stuck with him. It wasn't just about the apology, or the tweet, or even the media buzz. It was about the way Sarah had shown him a side of the world he didn't always see. She wasn't someone chasing fame or recognition. She wasn't a celebrity. She was simply a person trying to do her job, trying to be seen for who she was, not who people assumed she was. In that moment, something shifted in Elon. He wasn't sure what it was, but he felt like he needed to do more. Not just for his companies, or for his public image, but for people like Sarah. People who were trying to do the right thing, but got caught up in a system that sometimes overlooked their humanity. When the plane touched down and he stepped into the summit, he had a decision to make. The conversation he had with Sarah wasn't just a learning moment for him. It was a turning point. Perhaps it was time to stop focusing so much on changing the world with technology and start focusing on how he could change the way the world treated people, how he could make others feel seen, heard, and valued. Meanwhile, Sarah was still trying to wrap her head around the surreal turn of events. At the airport, everything had seemed to return to normal, until the media continued to latch onto the story, framing it as a tale of redemption for both her and Elon Musk. And yet, there was an uncomfortable feeling brewing inside her. The world had given her this moment of grace, but she didn't know what to do with it. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the attention, or if the new level of scrutiny would affect her work. She hadn't expected the situation to snowball like it had, and now, she was faced with a new challenge, managing the consequences of her own newfound fame. There were the emails from journalists, offering her interviews and photo ops. There were the social media comments from people calling her a hero for her handling of the situation. It felt strange, almost wrong. She wasn't a hero. She was just doing her job. Yet, the world had placed her on a pedestal, and she wasn't sure how to climb down. Her colleagues, too, were acting differently around her. Some of them seemed to distance themselves, perhaps feeling uncomfortable with the sudden change in perception. Others gave her knowing smiles, as if they were all in on an inside joke. There was one moment, during a routine security check, when an elderly man had approached her and said, "Thank you, miss, for showing the world that we all make mistakes." It was a strange feeling, to be thanked for a mistake. As Sarah walked through the airport later that evening, heading to her car, she saw a familiar face in the crowd. Marcus, her supervisor. He was walking toward her, looking unusually serious. When he caught her eye, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. "Hey, Sarah," Marcus greeted her, his tone more cautious than usual. "We need to talk." At first, Sarah didn't know what to make of his sudden seriousness. Was it about the media frenzy? Had her actions been misinterpreted by her superiors? She followed him to a quieter corner of the airport, anxiety creeping in. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Marcus sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I just wanted to check in with you. We've all seen the media coverage, and I want to make sure you're doing okay. This whole thing has blown up more than any of us expected." Sarah nodded, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. "I'm fine, I think, but it's a lot. I didn't ask for any of this." Marcus gave her an understanding look. "I know. It's just that we've had some requests. People want to talk to you. Journalists, news outlets. And, well, let's just say the higher-ups are thinking about the image this could create for the airport." Sarah blinked. "What do you mean?" "Some of the executives are concerned," Marcus continued, looking uncomfortable. "They're worried about the attention it might bring, both good and bad. They want you to be careful. There's talk about maybe taking advantage of the situation, using it to, I don't know, build the airport's public image." Sarah's heart sank. She hadn't signed up for any of that. She had just wanted to do the right thing, to make an apology and move on. But now, she could feel the weight of the system closing in on her again. "I don't want to be a part of that," she said quietly. "I just want to get back to my work. I don't want the media attention, and I don't want anyone using me for their own agenda." Marcus looked at her sympathetically. "I get it. I really do. But the reality is that this thing's bigger than just you or me. There are people higher up who see this as an opportunity, and they'll push for you to take it." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had made one mistake, apologized for it, and now the world wanted to turn it into a spectacle. "How do I get out of this?" she asked, almost pleading. Marcus hesitated, his eyes reflecting the struggle of the situation. "I wish I had an answer. But if you decide to step away, you'll need to make it clear to the higher-ups. You'll need to let them know that you're not comfortable with the media circus." As Sarah walked back to her car later that evening, she felt the weight of the decision on her shoulders. She knew she had to make a choice, and whatever choice she made would shape not just her future, but her identity. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. Every time she thought she could find a moment of peace, another text, call, or email came through. Another request for an interview, another news outlet wanting to feature her story. Even her social media, which she had kept private for years, was bombarded with messages. Most of them were supportive, but the pressure was undeniable. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Marcus. "We need to talk. Can you come by the office when you're off shift? It's about the media thing. I think you should be prepared for what's coming." Sarah's stomach twisted. She hadn't wanted to get involved with the media circus. She had done what she thought was right in the moment, but now it felt like the world was trying to take ownership of her actions. She just wanted to go back to being a regular TSA agent, unnoticed by the masses, helping people through security. But the train had left the station, and there was no turning back now. Later that day, after clocking out, Sarah drove to the office. It wasn't far from the airport, just a short ride down a quiet stretch of road. Her thoughts raced as she navigated the familiar streets, trying to prepare herself for whatever Marcus was about to say. Was she going to have to do interviews? Would she be forced into a promotional role? She didn't want to be anyone's symbol of redemption. She just wanted to be Sarah. When she arrived at the small office building, she parked in her usual spot and walked inside. The familiar hum of the fluorescent lights and the clatter of keyboards felt oddly comforting, a stark contrast to the emotional whirlwind she'd been swept into over the past few days. Marcus was already there, pacing by his desk when she entered. He looked serious, but his expression softened when he saw her. "Sarah, thanks for coming in. Please, take a seat." She sat down, glancing nervously at the papers stacked on his desk. He looked at her with an expression that seemed to carry both concern and frustration. "I don't know how to say this," Marcus began, his voice low, "but I've had a lot of talks with upper management, and I need to be honest with you. They're pushing for you to take advantage of this opportunity. They want to put you in the spotlight." Sarah's heart sank. She had been expecting something along these lines, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. "What does that mean? What are they asking me to do?" "They're talking about interviews, public appearances. They want you to be part of a campaign. You'd be a spokesperson for the airport. They think this could be big for public relations, especially since the media is still covering the story in a positive light." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I don't want that. I didn't do this for recognition. I didn't do this for anyone's agenda." Marcus sighed, sitting across from her. "I know. Believe me, I know. But the higher-ups, they don't see it that way. They see a story that's good for business. And you're caught in the middle of it." "I don't want to be used like that," Sarah replied, her voice rising with frustration. "I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to do the right thing. I don't want to be part of some media circus." Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with his own feelings on the matter. "I get it, Sarah. I really do. But the reality is, the airport is a business. And businesses capitalize on moments like these." Sarah stood up, suddenly feeling claustrophobic in the small office. She took a few steps toward the window and looked out at the skyline. The evening sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, a far cry from the storm swirling inside her mind. She turned back to Marcus, trying to steady her voice. "I didn't sign up for this. I don't want my name out there, tied to some campaign. I didn't do it for the attention. I just did my job." Marcus leaned back in his chair, clearly understanding her frustration. "I know you did, but it's not up to us anymore. The higher-ups want you to make a decision. You either embrace the media attention or step back. But if you step back, it's going to cause problems with management." Sarah swallowed hard. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest. On one hand, she could take the opportunity, accept the spotlight, and possibly use it to make a difference. Maybe she could use this platform to talk about integrity, about humility, and the importance of being kind. On the other hand, she could walk away, but that might cost her more than just her peace of mind. It might mean losing her job. "Do I have a choice?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. Marcus didn't answer right away. He just met her gaze and then slowly nodded. "You always have a choice. But sometimes, the choices we make come with consequences." As Sarah left the office that evening, her mind raced. She didn't want to become someone's puppet for their corporate gains. But if she refused, would they use her refusal against her? Would she be punished for not playing along? And what about Elon? She hadn't spoken to him since their meeting, but his tweet had put her in the spotlight, whether she liked it or not. Was this all his doing? Was he now watching her, expecting something from her, just as the airport management was? Or had his support truly been genuine? Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at it. It was a text from Elon. "Hey Sarah, I hope you're doing okay. I know things have been crazy for you. Just wanted to check in and say thanks again for being so graceful through everything. You did the right thing." She stared at the text for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. It was kind, thoughtful even, but it only added to the pressure she was already feeling. "Thanks, Elon. It's just a lot right now. I didn't expect any of this." She hit send and sat back in her car, staring out at the highway. Her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined, And now, standing at this crossroads, she wasn't sure which path to take. The next day, Sarah arrived at work with a heavy heart. As she passed through security, she found herself stopping at the same spot where she had stood just days before when Elon Musk had been detained. She couldn't help but wonder if he would ever understand how much his support had affected her, how much it had complicated her life in ways she wasn't prepared for. As she walked past the security desk, her supervisor waved her over. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you," he said, his voice unusually soft. She turned, surprised to see Elon standing near the entrance of the terminal. He looked out of place in his casual clothes, yet somehow, his presence felt oddly familiar. "Elon," she said, taken aback. He smiled warmly. "Hi, Sarah. I hope I'm not interrupting." The soft hum of the airport terminal felt oddly distant as Sarah stood frozen, her gaze locked with Elon's. She hadn't expected to see him here, not after the tweet, not after everything that had happened. But there he was, casually leaning against the security desk, his presence impossible to ignore. The entire terminal seemed to quiet down around them, the constant flow of passengers momentarily halted by his arrival. "Hey," Elon said with an easy smile, as if it were just any other day. His voice was warm, almost apologetic, as though he understood the weight of the moment. "I didn't mean to surprise you like this. I just wanted to check in and see how you're holding up. I know things have been intense." Sarah, still stunned, managed to give him a small nod, her voice a little shakier than she intended. "I wasn't expecting this. I didn't expect to see you here." Elon straightened up and took a step closer, his gaze softening. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, about everything that happened. It's been a lot for you, hasn't it?" She couldn't help but laugh bitterly, the sound escaping before she could filter it. "Yeah, a lot. I didn't ask for any of this, Elon. I didn't want any of this attention. It's not like I wanted to be a part of your story, or whatever this is. I just did my job." He nodded slowly, his expression empathetic. "I understand, and I'm sorry if I made things harder for you. That wasn't my intention, but I just want you to know, you did something right. People don't always do that in moments like that, but you did, and I respect that." Sarah looked at him, trying to read the sincerity in his eyes. Was he truly sorry for how this had all played out? Or was this another part of his larger-than-life image, a performance crafted to soothe his conscience? "I didn't want to be part of a headline," she said quietly, her voice heavy. "I didn't want to be used for anyone's agenda. Not yours, not the airport's, no one's." Elon's face softened even more. "I get it. I really do. And I respect you for standing up for what you believe in. But you have to understand, sometimes the world doesn't give us the choice to stay in the background. You're not the only one caught in the crossfire here. I'm facing a lot of the same pressure, just in a different way." Sarah tilted her head, feeling the weight of his words. "What do you mean?" "People are looking at me differently now, too," Elon continued. "I didn't expect any of this either, and I don't think you did. I'm getting bombarded with calls, with requests. The media is treating me like some sort of savior just because I posted a tweet. But the truth is, I'm just like you. We both made decisions in that moment, and now we're both paying the price." The way he said it made her feel less isolated, less alone in this whirlwind. For the first time since the incident, she felt a little less like a pawn in someone else's game. He was right. They were both caught up in something much bigger than they could control. And somehow, it was comforting to know that even someone as high-profile as Elon Musk felt the weight of it all, too. "I didn't want to be anyone's symbol," Sarah admitted, the words flowing out before she could stop them. "I just wanted to do my job. But now I'm just getting pulled into all this corporate and media nonsense. They want me to be the face of something I didn't even sign up for." Elon's gaze never wavered. "I understand, Sarah. I really do. And you don't have to be a part of any of that. But you also have a choice. Just like me. We always have a choice, even when it doesn't feel like it." Sarah let out a deep breath, the knot in her chest loosening slightly. "So, what am I supposed to do now? I don't want to let anyone down, but I don't want to be a pawn in some media campaign." Elon thought for a moment before responding. his voice steady and honest. You do what feels right for you. It's not about the airport's image or my image or anyone else's. It's about your peace of mind. You have to be true to yourself. If you want to walk away from all this, do it. If you want to stay and speak out, then do it. But don't let anyone else decide your story for you. His words rang in her ears, a quiet echo of clarity that she hadn't had before. It wasn't about the right or wrong decision for the world. It was about what felt right for her. Sarah left work that evening feeling a little lighter. Her conversation with Elon had given her the perspective she needed. She wasn't alone in this, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could take back control of her own narrative. She went home and sat down at her kitchen table, the quiet of her apartment a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in her mind. Her phone was silent for the moment, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The media requests would keep coming, the calls from the airport would continue, and the pressure to make something of this would not go away. But tonight, she could breathe. The following day, Sarah made her decision. She wasn't going to allow herself to be used as some symbol of corporate redemption. She wasn't going to be part of a media campaign to boost the airport's image or give Elon more press. She would speak her truth, but on her terms. When she arrived at work, Marcus found her in the break room, sipping her coffee. He looked at her expectantly, but she simply looked up at him, her expression calm but resolute. "I've made my decision," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I'm not going to do the interviews. I'm not going to play into any media circus. If the airport wants to promote my story, they can do it without me. I'm not interested in being a part of that. If they have a problem with that, then I'll leave." Marcus blinked, clearly taken aback by her directness. "Are you sure about this, Sarah? You've got a lot of support right now, and I just don't want you to make a decision you'll regret." "I'm sure," she said, meeting his gaze. "I don't need the spotlight. I don't need the world watching my every move. I just want to do my job. And if that's not good enough for them, then maybe it's time I moved on." Marcus stood there for a moment, looking as though he was about to say something, but then he simply nodded. "I understand. I'll let them know." Later that day, Sarah met with the airport's upper management. The conversation was difficult, to say the least. They tried to convince her to reconsider, to take advantage of the opportunity they saw before her. They promised her media training, guaranteed positive press, and even suggested that it could lead to more recognition within the airport for her work. But Sarah stood her ground. She wasn't interested in becoming someone's talking point. She wasn't a symbol for redemption. She was just Sarah, an airport worker trying to do the right thing. After a tense exchange, they finally relented, though it was clear they were disappointed. But Sarah had made her choice. She had taken control of her own story. As she left the meeting, she felt a quiet sense of relief. The weight she carried for days finally started to lift. She had made the decision that was right for her, and for once, that was enough. As the days went on, the media attention gradually faded. Sarah returned to her work at the airport, but she no longer felt like a pawn in someone else's game. She had stepped back from the spotlight, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her own peace. Elon's message was still on her phone, unread. But Sarah knew that, in the end, it wasn't his approval she needed. It was her own. After Sarah's decision to step away from the spotlight, things seemed to settle down, for a while, at least. The flood of media requests began to slow, and the tension at the airport eased. The management, though disappointed, eventually respected her wishes. No more interviews. No more press tours. It felt like a return to normalcy, or as close as she could get to it in her current reality. The first few days back to her regular routine were an adjustment. Sarah had never been the kind of person to seek attention, and though the quiet was a relief, it was also unsettling. Her peers were still talking about her, about the heroic act of standing up to Elon Musk's detention, but they were doing so in quieter, more respectful tones. There was no longer the buzzing sense of scrutiny hovering over her every action. She could go through security without wondering if someone was watching, evaluating, or trying to make a story out of her movements. Yet, as much as she had pushed the media circus away, it still lingered in the background. Elon had texted her a few times, checking in, offering words of encouragement. His presence, though distant, was a reminder that her life had changed, even if she didn't want it to. One evening, as Sarah was finishing up her shift, She stood by the baggage claim, staring at the luggage carousel, lost in thought. Her mind often drifted to what her future held. Could she stay in a job that had once felt so comfortable and familiar, now that her life had been upended? "Hey, Sarah." A voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned and saw Marcus approaching. His expression was unusually soft, and she could tell something was on his mind. "Hey, Marcus. What's up?" He gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" "Really?" Sarah didn't hesitate. She had been avoiding the deeper conversations about how this whole situation had affected her, but it felt like now was the time to confront it head-on. "It's been a lot more than I expected. I mean, I just wanted to go back to normal. But nothing's normal anymore, and I feel like I'm stuck between trying to make peace with what happened and still wanting to keep my life simple." Marcus nodded. "I get that. I think a lot of us do. But I have to ask, now that things are settling down, are you okay with your decision? With stepping away from everything?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah didn't know how to respond. She had been so sure at the time, so certain that rejecting the media frenzy was the right choice for her peace of mind. But now, in this quiet moment with Marcus, the weight of that decision felt more complicated. She had stepped away from the spotlight, yes, but had she done the right thing? Could she ever go back to being just Sarah, the ordinary TSA agent who kept to herself? I think I did what was right for me," Sarah said slowly, "but it doesn't make it easier. There's still this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that maybe I gave up something important, something I could have used to make a difference." Marcus studied her for a moment. "I don't think it's about making a difference for anyone else. You can only make a difference for yourself, and that's what matters. I've seen people get caught up in the spotlight, and trust me, it doesn't always work out the way they want. You've got to do what's best for you." His words were comforting, but they didn't fully ease the uncertainty inside her. She had walked away from something that could have been big, something that people in her position only dreamed of, and yet, there was still something so pure in the choice she'd made. The clarity that came with rejecting the fame was something she couldn't easily shake. As they spoke, she noticed a figure standing by the entrance. Elon. He hadn't texted her in a few days, and seeing him here, in the same space as she and Marcus, felt surreal. She hadn't expected their next encounter to be so public. He was dressed casually, of course, looking every bit the billionaire, but he wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or media personnel. Instead, he was alone, waiting patiently. "Excuse me," Sarah said, suddenly aware of the tension that had formed in her chest. "I need to go talk to someone." Marcus nodded and gave her a small smile. "Take your time. I'll be around." Sarah walked toward Elon, unsure of what she was going to say. Their previous conversation had left her with mixed feelings, but seeing him now, after everything that had happened, only complicated matters further. "Hey, Elon," she said, keeping her voice steady. He smiled warmly at her. "Hey, Sarah. How are you doing?" She shrugged, looking down at the floor for a moment. "I'm okay. Just trying to figure everything out." "I know the feeling," he replied. "I've been thinking about you, about what you decided. And I just wanted to tell you again, I think you made the right choice. It's hard to make decisions like that, especially when there's so much pressure." She looked up at him, feeling the sincerity in his words. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I gave up an opportunity, like I could have done something bigger with all this attention. But then I remember why I made that choice. I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to be me. I don't want to get lost in everything else." Elon nodded. "I get that. I respect it. And I think that's what makes you different from a lot of people. You're not letting the world define you. You're defining yourself. And that's rare." His words were grounding. For the first time since everything had exploded, Sarah felt as though someone understood. Elon was right. This was her decision, her life. And though it hadn't been easy, she was the one who had to live with it, not anyone else. "I appreciate you saying that," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just trying to find my place again." "You don't have to find it alone," Elon said gently. "I know it's been crazy, but if you ever want someone to talk to, or if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." His offer was kind, but Sarah didn't know if she could take him up on it. They had shared a unique moment in time, but their paths were so different. And the last thing she wanted was to be swept back into a world she had carefully distanced herself from. "I'll keep that in mind," she said softly, managing a small smile. Elon smiled back, a glint of understanding in his eyes. "Take care of yourself, Sarah. And remember, you don't owe anyone anything. Especially not me." As he walked away, Sarah felt an unexpected sense of relief. Elon had given her the space to make her own choices without any expectations hanging over her. And maybe that was all she needed to hear. The next few days passed uneventfully. Sarah continued working her shifts at the airport, dealing with the occasional glance or whispered comment from her colleagues. She had learned to ignore the rumors and chatter, focusing instead on her own work, her own life. But the question of what came next still loomed over her. She had chosen peace, but peace was a quiet thing. It wasn't as loud and obvious as fame or recognition. But that didn't mean it was any less valuable. Later that week, Sarah received a text from Marcus. It simply read, "You were right. The higher-ups wanted to offer you a promotion. It's just a PR thing, but I thought you'd want to know." For a moment, Sarah's heart stopped. The temptation to say yes was there, faint but persistent. But she didn't need to ask herself the question for long. She already knew the answer. She wasn't ready to go back to the spotlight. Not yet. The days following Sarah's decision to stay out of the media spotlight felt peaceful, yet there was a subtle restlessness under the surface. She had returned to her work at the airport, feeling more grounded than before, but something still tugged at her. It wasn't regret, exactly, but the sense that she was standing at a crossroads. Despite what she told herself, part of her wondered if she'd made a mistake by rejecting the offer the airport had dangled in front of her. After all, it could have been a big step forward in her career. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter one afternoon as she sipped her coffee, scrolling mindlessly through social media. It was a text from Marcus. "Marcus, hey Sarah, I need to talk to you about something. Call me when you get a chance." She raised an eyebrow. The message was brief and urgent, and it made her wonder if something had changed at the airport. She knew that Marcus was a straight shooter, and if he needed to talk, it was probably important. Sarah hit dial on his number, holding the phone to her ear. "Hey, Marcus. What's up?" "Hey, Sarah. I've got some news. The higher-ups just made me aware that there's been a shift in their strategy. They've been talking about promoting you, not just as a regular staff member, but as part of their public relations team. They want to use you as the face of the airport's hero campaign, and they're willing to offer you a significant pay raise and a higher position." Sarah paused, her pulse quickening. "Wait, what? They want to make me part of their PR team?" "Yeah, they're offering you a position to help shape the narrative around everything that happened. You'd get a higher profile role, more responsibility, and, well, more money. They believe you've got the credibility and the public image that can help them rebuild their reputation after the incident. They've been pushing this ever since you made your decision to step back, and now they're ready to move forward." Sarah leaned against the kitchen counter, taking a deep breath. The offer was exactly what she turned down just a few days ago. Fame, recognition, a new position. It was tempting. More money, more opportunity. The promise of not just moving up in the airport, but becoming a major part of how it was perceived. She had to admit, there was a small part of her that felt a flicker of excitement at the thought. But the very idea of it made her uneasy. She had worked so hard to reclaim her peace. She had distanced herself from the chaos and the media frenzy for a reason. "Marcus, I appreciate the heads up," Sarah said slowly, her voice betraying the confusion she felt. "But I don't know. I don't want to get dragged back into all of this. I get it," Marcus cut in, his tone softening. "But think about it. This could be an opportunity to shape the narrative, not just be part of it. You could set the tone, you know? It's not the same as being just another pawn in their game. You'd be in charge. You'd be leading it." His words were compelling, and part of her wanted to say yes, to grab this opportunity and run with it. But then another part of her, the one that had learned to stay out of the spotlight, whispered a warning. Was this really the right move? Could she go back to that world without losing herself? "I don't know, Marcus," she replied, her voice quieter now. "I've been thinking about all this, and I just don't want to get caught in another media storm. I've been through enough already. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, it was with a tone of understanding. Look, I'm not trying to pressure you, but I think you should at least consider it. Take some time to think it over. They're offering you a choice, Sarah. It's in your hands. Sarah sighed and set her coffee cup down, looking out the window. She was torn. On the one hand, this was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. It was exactly what she had walked away from, yet now it felt different. The stakes felt higher, the temptation greater. But deep down, she knew the real question wasn't about the job or the money. It was about who she wanted to be. Did she want to be Sarah, the private, quiet woman who kept her head down? Or did she want to be someone more? Someone with a platform, a voice, and a chance to lead. Okay, she said finally, after a long pause. I'll think about it. Good, Marcus said. Take your time. But know that the offer's on the table. And if you want to discuss it more, I'm here. The following days felt like a blur. Sarah found herself caught between the pull of her old life, the one where she worked quietly in the background, and the new, unfamiliar world that had opened up to her. As much as she longed for the simplicity of her old routine, she couldn't ignore the sense of possibility that this new role brought. The more she thought about it, the more it felt like an opportunity for growth. The more it felt like something she could shape into something meaningful. But there was a problem. The world she was entering wasn't just about the job. It was about managing a public image, answering to people who wanted to control that image, and constantly being on display. The fame and pressure were constant. On her day off, Sarah decided to visit her mother, Maye, hoping to clear her mind. Maye was one of the few people in Sarah's life who could offer perspective without pushing an agenda. After everything that had happened, Sarah felt she needed someone who could truly see her for who she was, not for the headline she had become. When she arrived at her mother's house, Maye greeted her with a warm hug. The house was calm, cozy, filled with the comforting scent of fresh lavender and homemade tea. They sat at the kitchen table, chatting about little things, family, work, life, until the conversation turned, as it often did, to Sarah's recent life changes. So, Maye said with a gentle smile, I heard about the offer from the airport, the promotion and everything. Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Yeah, they're offering me a position in their PR team. It sounds tempting, Mom. More money, a bigger role, but I'm scared. I don't want to be in the spotlight again. I don't want to be part of someone else's agenda. Maye's expression softened, and she reached across the table to touch Sarah's hand. Maye's expression softened, and she reached across the table to touch Sarah's hand. Sweetheart, you don't have to decide right away. You've already made a big decision by stepping away from the media. That takes strength. And you have to remember, you can still make a difference, whether you're behind the scenes or not. Sarah looked at her mother, her heart heavy. But if I don't take it, am I walking away from something important? Something I could use to really make a difference? Maye gave a thoughtful smile, her eyes glinting with the wisdom of experience. Making a difference doesn't always mean being in the spotlight. Sometimes the most important changes happen quietly. You have to ask yourself, what's the right choice for you? Not for anyone else, not for the airport, but for you, because that's what matters. The words resonated deep inside Sarah. She had already made her choice once, to protect her peace, her boundaries, and maybe she didn't need to chase after something that could take all that away. But maybe, just maybe, there was another way to make a difference. On her terms. The days after her conversation with her mother were a blur of introspection. Sarah couldn't stop replaying the words Maye had said to her. Making a difference doesn't always mean being in the spotlight. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that her peace had been the greatest gift she'd given herself in a long time. But the offer from the airport, along with the potential for a bigger role, more influence, and yes, more money, was like a siren call. What if this was her opportunity to redefine what it meant to make a difference? To stay true to herself while also stepping into a new challenge? As Sarah sat at her small kitchen table one evening, sipping chamomile tea and flipping through a journal she'd started keeping a few months ago, she realized something important. The constant internal tug-of-war between what she had chosen and what she had been offered was making her anxious. It was time to stop wavering. Time to make a choice. But how? The decision wasn't just about the airport or the PR position. It was about who Sarah wanted to be moving forward. Did she want to remain hidden in the quiet comfort of her life? Or did she want to step into a role where she could actively shape the future? The sound of her phone buzzing pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced down and saw a message from Marcus. Marcus, Sarah, just wanted to let you know the offer's still on the table. The execs are really hoping you'll join the team. Let me know if you need anything. The message felt almost like a nudge, a reminder that she was still being pulled in two directions. She stared at her phone, chewing on her lip. It wasn't just a professional decision. It was personal, too. How much of herself was she willing to give up for the sake of this new role? Could she keep her privacy, her quiet life, if she took on such a public-facing job? With a sigh, Sarah typed back a simple response. Sarah, I'm thinking about it, Marcus. I'll let you know soon. She set the phone down and closed her eyes for a moment. Her mind raced. That night, after a long day at the airport, Sarah couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, her thoughts bouncing from one possibility to another. Finally, around 2 a.m., she grabbed her phone and sent a message to Elon. Sarah, hey Elon, I need some advice. Can you talk? It had been a while since they last spoke, but Sarah knew Elon wasn't the type of person to shy away from a tough conversation. He was someone who always looked at things from a different perspective, someone who wasn't afraid to push the boundaries of what seemed possible. She needed that clarity. She needed someone who could understand the delicate balance of career, public perception, and personal peace. A few moments later, her phone buzzed with a reply. Elon, sure, let's talk. I'm free for a call. Sarah, it's good to hear from you. Elon's voice came through clear and calm on the other end of the line. What's on your mind? She settled back on her couch, hugging a blanket around her. I've been offered a job. It's a big one, Elon. A PR position with the airport. It's a promotion, but it would put me back in the spotlight. More responsibility, more media exposure. And I'm torn. On the one hand, it's a huge opportunity. On the other, I've spent so much time running away from all of that. I don't know if it's worth giving up my peace for this. Elon was silent for a moment. She could hear the sound of a keyboard tapping in the background, but he didn't rush to fill the silence with an immediate response. You know, Sarah, he said finally, I've spent a lot of my life in the public eye. It's not always what people think it is. It's a weird kind of freedom and a strange kind of prison. You're constantly being watched, judged, and in some ways shaped by others' expectations. Sarah nodded, her grip tightening on the phone as she listened. I've seen that with you. I don't know if I want to go through that again. I like being ordinary. I like not having to perform for anyone. I get it, Elon continued, his voice soft. I've been in your shoes before. You don't have to take the offer if it doesn't feel right. But you also don't have to run from what's next. Life's not about avoiding things that might be uncomfortable. It's about deciding what kind of discomfort you're willing to live with. His words hit home harder than she expected. For so long, Sarah had been running away from the discomfort of being seen, of standing out. But was it really running, or was she just afraid to step into her own power? You don't have to be a slave to the spotlight, Elon added. But you also don't have to let fear of it define you. It's about control. You can shape the story, or you can let it shape you. It's your choice. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his advice settle over her. Thanks, Elon. I needed to hear that. I guess. I just need to figure out if I'm ready to take control of my own narrative. You'll know when it's the right time, Elon said with a chuckle. Trust yourself. The next day, Sarah woke up feeling clearer than she had in weeks. It wasn't that her decision had become easier. It was that she had started to understand it in a new way. She didn't have to reject everything for the sake of her peace, but she also didn't have to throw herself into the chaos of a public life. The key was balance, control, ownership of her own narrative. She spent the rest of the day thinking about the offer, weighing the pros and cons, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt empowered. She had learned that she could stand in her truth, quietly, if she wanted to, but she could also step into the light, if it was on her terms. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table again, phone in hand. She'd made her decision. She drafted a message to Marcus. Sarah, I've thought it through. I'm going to accept the offer, but I need to set clear boundaries from the start. This is my choice, and I'm going to control how I engage with the public, the media, and the role itself. I can do this on my terms. A few minutes later, Marcus texted back, Marcus, you got it, Sarah. I knew you'd come to the right decision. Let's make this work for you. Sarah smiled. She felt a sense of relief wash over her, followed by a surge of excitement. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could shape her future, make an impact, and stay true to herself. It was her story to tell, and this time, she was going to tell it on her own terms. The decision was made. Sarah had accepted the airport's offer for the PR role, but she knew that her journey was far from over. As she sat at her desk in her small apartment the following week, her laptop open in front of her, she couldn't help but feel both excited and apprehensive. She was about to step into a new chapter of her life, but she was also determined to do it on her terms. Her first day at the airport's headquarters came quickly. Sarah had spent the last few days mentally preparing herself for what was to come. The world of corporate PR, media scrutiny, and high-stakes decisions was a far cry from her days of quietly helping passengers and keeping things running behind the scenes. She knew she'd have to navigate this new world carefully. When Sarah arrived at the airport headquarters that morning, the building was sleek and modern, with glass walls that allowed a full view of the busy airport below. It felt like a place where dreams were made and crushed all in one go. The staff greeted her warmly, but there was an underlying sense of expectation. She was no longer the woman who quietly worked behind the scenes. Now, she was the face of the airport's new image. As she made her way to the elevator, she noticed the change in the way people looked at her. There was a certain curiosity, almost as if they were waiting for her to fail or succeed. It felt like she was under a microscope, and part of her bristled at the feeling. She didn't mind being noticed, but she wanted to control how much of herself she shared. The first few days were intense. Meetings with executives, media strategists, and image consultants filled her schedule. She was bombarded with ideas, photo shoots, press conferences, and social media campaigns. The vision for her role was clear. She was going to be the airport's symbol of resilience, the one who would embody the transformation they so desperately needed. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort. It wasn't that she didn't want to help rebuild the airport's reputation. It was the way they wanted to mold her into a public figure. The constant barrage of press releases, the pressure to smile for the camera, to perform. She had to speak up. She had to set the tone. On the fourth day, Sarah scheduled a meeting with the PR team. She felt it was time to lay out her boundaries before things spiraled out of control. When the time came, she walked into the bright, glass-walled conference room, where the team was already seated, ready to discuss their next big campaign. "Thank you for meeting with me," Sarah began, standing at the front of the room. "I wanted to take a moment to address something important before we go any further." The team looked at her, their eyes sharp with curiosity. Sarah could feel the weight of the room's attention on her, but she held her ground. She knew that if she was going to do this, she had to assert herself from the very start. "I've agreed to take on this position, but I want to make it clear that I'm doing so on my terms," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I understand the need for media exposure and public engagement, but I will not be available for every photo op, every press release, or every event. My personal life will remain private. I'm here to rebuild the airport's image, not to become a celebrity." The room fell silent for a beat. Sarah's words hung in the air, and she could see some of the team members processing what she had said. One of the senior PR strategists, a woman named Claire, finally spoke. "I appreciate your candor, Sarah," Claire said, adjusting her glasses. "But you must understand, part of the role is being highly visible. It's not just about being the face of the airport, it's about managing the narrative. We're in a delicate situation here. Every move you make will be scrutinized." "I get that," Sarah replied calmly, "but that doesn't mean I'm going to sacrifice my peace and well-being for it. I will be involved in shaping the narrative, but I won't be pushed into a mold that doesn't fit me. I'm here to help, but I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not." The room seemed to exhale collectively, as if they hadn't expected Sarah to take such a firm stance. Claire nodded thoughtfully. "I respect that, Sarah," she said, "and I think it's important that we build your role around what you're comfortable with. We can still create an impact, even if you're not constantly in the spotlight. We'll work with you on that. Sarah felt a wave of relief. Setting boundaries wasn't easy, but it was essential. She wasn't there to be exploited or manipulated for the sake of a narrative. She was there to help rebuild something important, but her well-being and sense of self came first. Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked closely with the PR team to strategize a campaign that would highlight the airport's resilience without leaning too heavily on her personal story. She agreed to limited media appearances and focused her efforts on internal initiatives, helping to foster a new culture within the airport that emphasized teamwork, customer care, and community outreach. She was vocal about the need for authenticity in their messaging and made sure that their campaigns reflected the true values of the airport. The results were immediate. There was a noticeable shift in the tone of the media coverage. Instead of sensationalizing her involvement in the transformation, the press began to highlight the airport's growth and improvements. Sarah was positioned as a leader, but not as a figurehead. She had successfully carved out a space where she could contribute without being consumed by the job. One day, a few months into her new role, she received an unexpected call from Elon. "Sarah, how's the new job treating you?" he asked, his voice warm but curious. "It's been a whirlwind," she replied, "but I'm finding my balance. I've set some pretty strict boundaries, and it's actually been really freeing. I've learned that I can help without being pulled into the chaos. It's exactly what I needed." "I'm glad to hear that," Elon said. "You've always been about control, haven't you? Finding a way to shape things on your terms. That's what makes you different." Sarah smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "Yeah, I guess you could say I'm learning to navigate the spotlight without letting it define me. It's a work in progress." "You'll figure it out," Elon replied. "And if you ever need someone to talk to about all this media stuff, you know where to find me." "Thanks, Elon. I appreciate it. I'm actually feeling pretty good about everything right now." As Sarah hung up the phone, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. She was in control of her narrative. She had set boundaries and honored them, all while helping to rebuild the airport's reputation in a way that felt true to her values. The next step would be even harder, she knew. She wasn't just shaping a brand. She was shaping a legacy, one where she could have the career she wanted without sacrificing the life she loved. It was about balance, about finding a way to thrive without compromising who she was. And Sarah was more than ready for that challenge. The months after Sarah's bold decision to set boundaries had been a whirlwind of growth, both personally and professionally. The airport's reputation was slowly but steadily improving, and her role had evolved into something more meaningful than she had ever anticipated. She had built a network of allies within the company, people who respected her boundaries and were eager to collaborate on projects that aligned with her values. But there was an undeniable truth. Despite her best efforts, her newfound position of power attracted attention, both good and bad. As the airport's media presence began to rise, Sarah found herself constantly walking a tightrope, trying to balance the demands of her role with her desire to keep her private life intact. One particularly cold morning in January, Sarah was in the middle of a meeting with her team when her phone buzzed on the table in front of her. She picked it up, glancing at the notification before her. It was a text message from her mother. "May, Sarah, I just saw your interview with the news. They're saying you're the new face of the airport transformation. I'm so proud of you. But remember, the spotlight can be blinding." Sarah smiled softly. Her mother's wisdom always had a way of grounding her, even when things felt like they were spinning out of control. But that wasn't what made her pause. It was the text message that followed. Unknown number. "Hey, Sarah, I saw you on TV last night. You're doing great things. But just so you know, we've got our eyes on you. Be careful who you trust around you." The message sent a chill down her spine. Who was this? What did they mean by, "we've got our eyes on you"? It didn't sound like a random comment. It felt like a veiled threat. But Sarah couldn't afford to get distracted by vague insinuations. She had a job to do. After the meeting ended, Sarah couldn't shake the unsettling feeling. She had gotten used to the media spotlight, but something about the message gnawed at her. There was no name, no clear context, just an ominous warning. The next day, as she sat at her desk in the office, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the text. She called Marcus, the head of her PR team, and decided to let him know what had happened. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about something," Sarah said, her voice tense as she leaned back in her chair. I received a strange text yesterday from an unknown number. It didn't sound like a fan, and it didn't feel like something I should ignore. What did it say? Marcus asked, his tone immediately serious. Sarah recounted the message. Marcus was quiet for a long moment after she finished. I don't like it, Sarah. It sounds like someone's trying to intimidate you. Or at the very least, get under your skin, Marcus said, his voice steady. This could be nothing, but we need to take it seriously. We can't have anyone trying to undermine you or your work. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I also don't want to be blindsided, Sarah replied. Can you do a quick check? See if anyone's been digging into my background, or if there's anything suspicious going on? Consider it done, Marcus said. I'll keep you updated. The next few days were a blur of increased media appearances and high-pressure meetings. Despite her growing sense of unease, Sarah pushed forward with her work. She had been working on a major campaign that aimed to highlight the human element of the airport. Stories of real people who worked behind the scenes to keep things running smoothly. It was a project that resonated deeply with her, as it allowed her to showcase the unsung heroes of the airport. But the pressure was mounting. Every time she looked over her shoulder, she felt as though someone was watching her. Whether it was in the office or out in public, the sense of being under surveillance was starting to take a toll on her. She started getting more cryptic messages, all coming from unknown numbers. The texts were vague but pointed, with phrases like, "You can't hide forever. We know what you're up to." Each message felt like a warning, a reminder that she was in uncharted waters. But who was behind it? And why? By the time the weekend arrived, Sarah was exhausted. She hadn't slept well in days, and the relentless pressure was beginning to affect her focus. She needed to clear her head. She called her mother, hoping for some advice. "Mom, I'm overwhelmed," Sarah said as she paced around her apartment. "I'm getting these weird texts, and it feels like someone is following me. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm on the edge of something, but I can't figure out what it is." Maye's voice was calm but firm. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. You've worked hard to get where you are. People are going to try to tear you down, especially when they see you as a threat. But you don't have to do this alone. I know you're used to handling things on your own, but you have people who care about you. Let them help." "But Mom, it's not just about the job," Sarah said, feeling the weight of the pressure bearing down on her. "It's like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder. It's like someone's out to get me, and I can't shake it." "Then don't," Maye said. "Don't shake it off. Be aware. Take action. If something feels wrong, trust that instinct. Don't let fear dictate your choices, but also don't ignore the warnings. We have to be cautious." The following Monday, Sarah met with Marcus to go over the latest campaign materials. But before they could begin, Marcus dropped a bombshell. "I've been looking into those texts," Marcus said, his face tense. "It's not just random people sending messages. I've found some inconsistencies in our security footage and reports from our digital team. There's been unauthorized access to some of your personal files, and someone's been leaking details about your background. It's someone inside the airport, Sarah. Someone who has access to a lot more than they should." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What does this mean? Who's doing this?" "I don't know yet," Marcus replied, his voice tight with frustration. "But we'll find out. And when we do, we'll make sure they understand the consequences." The reality of the situation hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just dealing with an anonymous threat from some faceless individual. She was facing a betrayal from someone she worked with, someone within her own team. The feeling of being hunted, of being watched, was no longer just paranoia. It was real. As she sat in her office, staring at the phone in her hand, Sarah realized that this wasn't just about her career anymore. This was personal. Whoever was behind this was trying to take her down, and she wasn't about to let them. She had set her boundaries, but now it was time to draw a line in the sand. No one was going to destroy what she had worked so hard to build, not without a fight. And Sarah was more than ready for that fight. The tension that had been building over the last few weeks finally came to a head. Sarah was no longer just a public figure, caught in the swirl of media attention. She was a target. Someone inside the airport was leaking information about her, and those cryptic messages were just the beginning. That afternoon, After Marcus had briefed her about the security breach, Sarah decided it was time to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. The messages, the suspicious activity, the feeling of being watched, it all pointed to one thing: betrayal. The first step, she knew, was to figure out who inside the airport could have had access to her personal files and sensitive information. She had trusted many of her colleagues, but trust had a price, and she had learned the hard way that it was never as secure as it seemed. "Marcus, I need to know everything," Sarah said, her voice low and determined as she met him in his office the following morning. "Who has had access to my personal information? Who's been going through my files? I don't care if they're in PR, security, or management. I need names." Marcus hesitated. His face was tight with concern, but Sarah could see the wheels turning in his head. He knew the gravity of the situation. "I'll start pulling the logs from the internal systems," Marcus said, tapping a few keys on his laptop. "But Sarah, this could take time. I need to be sure before we jump to any conclusions." "I don't have time, Marcus," Sarah snapped, her patience thinning. "If we don't act now, the damage will be done before we even know who's responsible." Marcus nodded, clearly understanding the urgency in her voice. He made a few more notes before getting to work. In the meantime, Sarah took to reviewing her own communications and messages. She had a stack of old files and emails, some of which were personal and some related to the airport's operations. She had always kept things private, but now, in the face of this threat, every conversation felt suspect. As Sarah skimmed through the files, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Her personal email, where she'd never given out sensitive information, had been compromised. There, in a chain of messages, were details of a meeting she had had with a vendor weeks ago. The details of that meeting weren't public knowledge. The only people who could have known about it were her close colleagues. But the leak wasn't the worst part. As she continued to dig, she found something even more unsettling: a detailed breakdown of her social media activity, where she went, who she interacted with, even what time she was last on the airport premises. Her heart raced. Whoever had done this was not only in the airport system, but was also tracking her every move. The violation felt personal, and it shook her to the core. By the time Marcus came back to her office, it was late in the afternoon. He looked tired but resolute. "I found something," he said, his voice grim. "We have an employee in the management team who's been accessing your files without proper clearance. His name is David Harris. He works in operations." Sarah felt the air in the room grow heavy. David Harris? She knew him. David was a seasoned manager who had been with the airport for over 10 years. He was well respected by his peers, trusted by the executive team, and someone Sarah had always thought was loyal to the airport's mission. But now, it seemed, that loyalty was in question. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, trying to maintain her composure despite the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "How can you be certain it's him?" "His access logs are clear. No one else has been in your files as frequently as he has," Marcus explained. "He's been pulling information from your personal accounts, emails, text messages, even things related to your social media activity. I've had our IT team double-check. It's all been traced back to him." Sarah's stomach churned. The realization hit her like a truck. Someone she had trusted, someone who had always seemed like a reliable colleague, was now the person who had been orchestrating her surveillance. "I need to confront him," Sarah said, standing up from her desk. She felt the weight of the decision press heavily on her shoulders. "I can't let this go any further. We need to stop him before he causes more damage." Marcus nodded, but he was visibly concerned. "We need to be careful, Sarah. He's an insider, and he knows the system. If he realizes we're onto him, we could be in even more danger. You're dealing with someone who might be willing to go to extreme lengths to protect themselves." "I don't care," Sarah said, determination in her voice. "I'm not letting this slide. Not again. Not after everything I've worked for." Later that evening, Sarah met with Marcus again to discuss the next steps. They decided to approach the confrontation carefully. They would gather enough evidence to expose David, but they needed to be discreet. If David became aware that Sarah was onto him, he could destroy the evidence, or worse, cover his tracks in a way that would make it nearly impossible to prove his involvement. The following morning, Sarah called David into her office. He arrived promptly, his typical professional demeanor in place. He greeted her with a smile, but Sarah could see the faintest flicker of unease in his eyes. "David, thanks for coming in," Sarah said, her tone cold but polite. "Please have a seat." David sat across from her, folding his hands on the table. "Of course, Sarah. What's on your mind?" Sarah wasted no time. "I've been made aware that someone has been accessing my personal files without authorization. The logs show it's been you." David's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "I'm not sure what you mean, Sarah. I don't have access to your personal files." "I know what I'm talking about, David," Sarah said, leaning forward. "I have proof. I'm giving you one chance to come clean before I take this to the authorities. Who are you working for? Who's behind this?" David's face went pale, his eyes darting around the room. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to deny everything. But then his expression shifted. He wasn't just trying to deflect suspicion anymore. He was calculating his next move. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice betraying a hint of panic. "I have no idea why my name would be in those logs." "You've got it all wrong, Sarah. I've been working for the airport for years. I've been loyal. I would never—" "You've been tracking me, David," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "I want to know why." David hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking toward the door. Then, with a resigned sigh, he slumped back in his chair, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "It was never supposed to go this far," he said quietly. "I was just doing what I was told." Before he could continue, the door to Sarah's office burst open, and Marcus walked in, flanked by 2 security officers. David's face went even paler, and for a brief moment, it looked like he might try to make a run for it. But it was too late. "We've got you, David," Marcus said, his voice cold. "You've been caught red-handed. You're coming with us." David looked at Sarah with a mixture of fear and regret. "I never wanted this to happen," he whispered. "It was just business. They told me it was for the greater good. I didn't know it would get out of hand." "You chose to betray me," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with disgust. "And now you'll face the consequences." As David was escorted out of the office, Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The relief was overwhelming, but it came with a heavy price. She had just uncovered a deep-seated betrayal within the airport, one that had been orchestrated by someone she had once considered an ally. The battle wasn't over, but Sarah knew that with David's confession, she had won the first round. The fight for control of her life was far from finished, but she was finally taking the reins. And she wasn't about to back down now. The aftermath of David Harris's arrest reverberated through the airport. For Sarah, the feeling of victory was fleeting. While she had finally exposed the betrayal within her ranks, the consequences of the breach were far-reaching. The damage to her trust, to the airport security protocols, and to her own sense of safety was profound. In the days that followed, Sarah had to manage the fallout from David's actions. The media caught wind of the scandal quickly, and soon, reporters were knocking on her door, trying to get a statement. The airport, once proud of its progressive rebranding, now had a black mark on its reputation. But the hardest part wasn't dealing with the press or managing public opinion. It was facing her team. How could she ask them to continue to trust her when they had seen a trusted colleague go rogue? How could she rebuild what had been shattered? The morning after David's arrest, Sarah called an emergency meeting with her leadership team. As she sat at the head of the table, looking at the familiar faces she'd worked so hard to connect with, she realized just how much the trust within the airport had been compromised. "I'm sure many of you have heard the news by now," Sarah began, her voice calm but firm. "David Harris was arrested last night after an internal investigation revealed he was behind the leaks of sensitive information. I know this is shocking, especially considering his long history with the company." A few members of the team exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Sarah could see the worry etched on their faces. They weren't just worried about the breach of trust. They were worried about the fallout. "I want to be clear," Sarah continued, her voice cutting through the tension. "David acted alone. He had no support within our organization. But his actions were a betrayal of the values we've worked so hard to uphold. I understand if some of you are feeling unsettled by this, but I'm asking for your trust. for your continued commitment to the work we're doing here." The silence in the room was thick. Finally, Claire, the head of customer relations, spoke up. "Sarah, we're all deeply shocked by what happened. David was, well, he was part of the fabric of this place. It's hard to believe something like this could happen," Claire said, her voice shaking slightly. "But we're with you. We believe in the vision you've set for the airport. We know it wasn't your fault." "Thank you, Claire," Sarah said, nodding at her colleague. "I need all of you to stay focused. We've come too far to let one person's actions undo everything we've built. We'll get through this together." As the meeting continued, Sarah's mind was elsewhere. The faces of her team were supportive, but Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she was truly fooling herself. Could she ever fully regain their trust? Could she trust them? By the time the meeting ended, Sarah was mentally and emotionally drained. She sat alone in her office, staring at her computer screen, when she received a text message from her mother. "May, I saw the headlines, Sarah. I know it's tough, but remember, you can't control the actions of others, only how you respond to them. Stay strong. Don't let this define you." Sarah read the message several times, the words comforting her in a way that nothing else could. Her mother's wisdom had always been a steadying force in her life. May knew how to put things into perspective, and right now, Sarah needed that clarity. Later that afternoon, Marcus called Sarah with an update. "We've got a full report from the investigation team," Marcus said over the phone. "It looks like David was part of a larger scheme. He wasn't acting alone in the initial leak, though he took it to extremes. We're still piecing things together, but we have leads pointing to external influences. There might be others involved." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The idea that David hadn't been acting alone was a new layer of complexity that she hadn't expected. "Who else could be involved?" she asked, her voice tight. "It's too early to tell," Marcus said, "but we're tracing the communication logs, and we've found several encrypted messages. Someone has been pulling strings from outside the airport. Whoever they are, they knew exactly how to manipulate David." The idea of an external player in this mess made Sarah's stomach churn. It was one thing to deal with an insider, someone she had once trusted, but it was an entirely different monster to think that someone from the outside had orchestrated the attack on her, her team, and the airport. "Keep me updated," Sarah said. "I need to know everything. I don't care how long it takes, Marcus. We need to find out who's behind this." "I'm on it," he promised before hanging up. The next few days were a blur. Sarah spent her time overseeing the investigation, meeting with the airport security teams, and trying to keep the public relations aspect from falling apart. Despite her personal unease, she put on a brave face for the public. Yet, the anxiety gnawed at her. The sense of being under constant surveillance never really went away. She found herself glancing over her shoulder more than ever, jumping at every phone call and email that came through. The following Friday, Marcus called her with news that would shake everything to its core. "It's worse than we thought," Marcus said, his voice grave. "We've traced the communication logs. The person behind the external manipulations is someone close to you, someone within the airport leadership. It's not just David. It's someone you know." Sarah's mind raced. Who? Who could it be? She had no idea. That afternoon, Sarah gathered the leadership team once again, this time with a heavy heart. Her team was more than just colleagues. They were her friends, her partners. And now, she was facing the possibility that someone she trusted had been behind the entire operation. "Something has come to light," Sarah said, addressing the group. "We've uncovered evidence that the breach was part of something larger. David wasn't acting alone, and the person behind the manipulation is someone with access to our leadership team." The room went silent. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. "I can't believe this," Claire said, her voice shaking. "Who would do such a thing?" "I don't know yet," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But I will find out. I'm not going to let this person tear everything we've worked for apart." Sarah's resolve was stronger than ever. Whoever was behind this, whether it was a colleague, a partner, or someone from the outside, was going to face the consequences. She wouldn't let them take away her hard-earned position, the trust she had built with her team, or her sense of security. But as the mystery deepened and the stakes rose higher, Sarah knew that her fight was far from over. Every day brought new twists, new threats. But she had a strength within her now, a fire that burned brighter than the fear. She wasn't going down without a fight. The days after Marcus's call felt like an endless series of tense moments. The uncertainty of who could be the traitor within the leadership team hung over Sarah like a dark cloud. Every glance, every handshake, every conversation now felt laced with suspicion. She didn't know who to trust anymore, and that realization hit her harder than she'd expected. She had built this airport from the ground up with her own hands, with the support of a tight-knit team. The thought that someone close to her could betray everything she stood for was more than just a personal blow. It was an attack on the very foundation of her career and her vision for the future of the airport. She spent hours poring over every lead, reviewing the logs, and interviewing those who had been closest to David. Everyone had seemed so loyal, so committed to the cause. But someone was hiding something. That evening, Sarah sat in her office, staring at the wall of screens in front of her. Marcus had sent over a new set of encrypted communications and surveillance footage, but the pieces didn't seem to fit together. There was no smoking gun, no obvious suspect. Yet, the suspicion that had started as a small whisper was now a full-blown storm. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was a text from her mother. "May, I know this is hard, but you're a fighter. You've faced worse than this, remember? Trust your instincts. You'll find the truth." Sarah smiled faintly at the message. Her mother always had a way of simplifying the situation, of reminding her that she was stronger than she thought. But Sarah knew this was different. This wasn't just a challenge. It was a war being waged from the shadows. The following morning, Sarah convened a private meeting with her senior leadership team. Marcus, Claire, and a few others sat around the table, each of them looking at her with a mixture of concern and determination. "We've identified something unsettling," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in her mind. "David wasn't working alone. Someone within our ranks has been feeding information to external parties. I've been reviewing the logs and communications, and I need your full cooperation to get to the bottom of this. We cannot afford another breach." There was a tense silence as the gravity of Sarah's words settled in. "I know this is hard to hear, but I need you all to be honest with me," she said. "I trust each of you, but right now, we need to strip away the layers of doubt. Someone in this room might be involved, and I need to know who." The room seemed to tighten, and Sarah could feel the unease radiating off everyone. They were all professionals, but this was different. Accusations of betrayal hit too close to home, and nobody wanted to be the one caught in the crossfire. Claire, the head of customer relations, was the first to speak. "Sarah, I don't know what to say. I've worked with David for years. He was a friend to all of us. I can't believe he'd do something like this. I can't imagine anyone here would have been involved." "I understand," Sarah said, meeting Claire's gaze. "I know this is difficult, but we need to be thorough. We need to find out who's been manipulating the situation from behind the scenes." Marcus spoke next, his tone cautious. "We've been investigating for days, Sarah. There's no clear evidence pointing to anyone specific, but the encrypted messages we found came from someone who had inside knowledge of airport operations. The way they were able to manipulate David means they knew exactly how to exploit weaknesses within our system." Sarah frowned. This wasn't just about protecting her position anymore. It was about ensuring the safety and integrity of the airport. If this went public in the wrong way, it could destroy everything they'd worked so hard to build. "So, what do we do now?" she asked, trying to calm the rising sense of urgency in her chest. "We need to dig deeper," Marcus said. "I've arranged for a full audit of the internal systems, but I want to start with the person who's closest to David, someone who might have known how to convince him to betray us." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she thought. She had already been looking at David's colleagues, but the one person she hadn't yet questioned was Alan Montgomery, the airport's director of operations. Alan had been a close ally of David's for years, and he had the kind of quiet influence that made people trust him. Alan had always kept a low profile, but his loyalty to the airport had never been questioned, until now. "Alan," Sarah said, her mind already racing with the implications. "It has to be Alan. He was the one who worked closest with David." Later that day, Sarah asked Alan to meet her in her office. She had planned the confrontation carefully, but even so, her heart was pounding in her chest. Alan had been with the airport since its inception, and if he had turned against her, everything was at risk. When Alan entered her office, he smiled warmly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Sarah could see the faintest hint of nervousness in his posture. He was trying to mask it, but it was there. "Sarah, you wanted to see me?" Alan asked, his voice steady, but with a note of uncertainty. "Take a seat, Alan," Sarah said, her tone calm but firm. Alan hesitated for a moment, then sat down across from her, folding his hands in front of him. "What's this about?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "Alan," Sarah began, leaning forward, "I've been looking through the investigation reports. David's actions, the leaks, the way the external party was able to manipulate the situation. It all points to someone with intimate knowledge of the airport's operations. Someone with access." Alan's face hardened, but he quickly recovered. "I don't know what you mean, Sarah. I've been working here for years. My loyalty is to this airport, just like yours." "I know that, Alan," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "But you were close to David, weren't you? You worked side by side with him. He trusted you." Alan's eyes flickered for a moment, the briefest hint of guilt flashing before he masked it. "Of course. We were colleagues. But that doesn't mean I had any involvement in what happened." "I want the truth, Alan," Sarah said, her voice lower now. "If you know something, if you've been part of this scheme in any way, now is the time to tell me." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Sarah thought Alan might crumble under the pressure. But instead, he sat back in his chair, a knowing look crossing his face. "Sarah, you don't understand," he said quietly, his voice tinged with bitterness. "I didn't want it to go this far. But David, he was my ticket to something bigger. I didn't think anyone would notice. I didn't think you would." Sarah's heart dropped as the words sank in. It wasn't just about betraying the airport. It was about something bigger. A scheme, a conspiracy, something that was more than just a personal vendetta. "You're saying you were working with David?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with disbelief. Alan nodded slowly. "It wasn't just me, Sarah. There's a bigger operation behind all of this. I wasn't the only one involved, and I'm not the only one who knew what was going on. But now it's too late." As Alan's confession echoed in her mind, Sarah realized that the person she had trusted most might have been part of a much larger conspiracy. The fact that he was speaking now, so openly, only deepened the mystery. Who else was involved, and why? What was the true scope of the operation? The layers of deceit were unraveling, but each new revelation brought more questions, more dangers. Sarah's fight to regain control of her life and the airport had just entered a new, darker phase. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal as she walked back to her office after Alan's confession. His words echoed in her mind like a broken record. "There's a bigger operation behind all of this. I wasn't the only one involved, and I'm not the only one who knew what was going on." What had she gotten herself into? How many people within her inner circle were involved in this conspiracy? And who were the others Alan had alluded to? The complexity of it all threatened to swallow her whole, but she couldn't afford to back down now. She had come too far. As Sarah entered her office, the weight of the situation bore down on her. The room felt colder than usual, the walls seeming to close in on her. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Alan's confession had opened a floodgate, but it had also deepened the mystery. What was the bigger operation? Sarah had to find out. She sat down at her desk and pulled up the latest investigation files, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she sifted through encrypted messages, logs, and surveillance footage. The more she looked, the more she felt the noose tightening. It was like a puzzle, each piece fitting together just enough to reveal a horrifying bigger picture, but still leaving too many gaps. The phone rang, cutting through the tense silence. Sarah picked it up without hesitation, knowing it was Marcus. "Sarah, we've uncovered something you need to see," Marcus said, his voice sharp with urgency. "What is it?" she asked, her heart already racing. "We've traced the communications. It's bigger than we thought, much bigger. Alan's not just a small player in all of this. He's been feeding information to a network. And it looks like it's not just about money or revenge. It's about power." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. Power? What do you mean? I'm not sure yet, but the encrypted messages suggest an external force is pulling the strings. We found connections to several high-level individuals outside the airport, people who have their own reasons for wanting this information, and they've been using Alan as a middleman. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Power. It wasn't just about betraying the airport anymore. Someone wanted to use the leaks for a much larger, more dangerous purpose. And Alan, someone she had trusted, had been complicit in it. We're tracing the connections as we speak, Marcus continued. But you need to be careful, Sarah. This goes higher than we thought. Sarah didn't need to hear more. She was already on edge, her mind racing. If what Marcus said was true, the conspiracy wasn't just a betrayal of the airport. It was an assault on everything she had built and everything she believed in. Her career, her integrity, even her safety were now on the line. The implications were staggering. She had no choice but to press forward and confront those behind this conspiracy head-on. She had to find the true mastermind before they could destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. As she left her office to meet with Marcus, she ran into Claire in the hallway. Claire's face was pale, her eyes wide with concern. Sarah could tell that her team was starting to feel the strain of the situation, and it wasn't just the fear of betrayal that was gnawing at them. It was the uncertainty. None of them knew where this was heading. Sarah, you look different, Claire said, her voice low. You okay? Sarah shook her head. No, Claire. Not at all. It's worse than we thought. Alan's involved, and he's not working alone. There's an entire network behind this, someone outside the airport pulling the strings. Claire's eyes widened. Who? What do you mean? What's really going on? I don't know yet, Sarah admitted, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of the situation, but I'm going to find out. I need you to stay focused. I'm not giving up on this airport, and I'm not giving up on our team. Claire nodded, though her face betrayed her concern. We'll help however we can. Just be careful, Sarah. This is getting dangerous. I know, Sarah replied, a determined edge to her voice. But I can't stop now. Not when I'm this close. The days that followed were a blur of investigation and mounting pressure. Sarah, with Marcus's help, began to unravel the broader network behind Alan's manipulation. They found more encrypted messages, more names. Each clue led them deeper into a world of corporate espionage, covert dealings, and shadowy figures who had set their sights on the airport for reasons Sarah still couldn't fully understand. One name kept appearing in the logs, Gregory Hughes. He was a businessman with connections to various industries, aviation, technology, and even government contracts. His name wasn't unfamiliar to Sarah. Hughes was known for his investments in tech startups and his influence in high-level business circles. But what was he doing with Alan? And why was he so intent on controlling the airport's future? Sarah knew she needed to confront Gregory Hughes, but she couldn't do it alone. She turned to her most trusted ally, Marcus. We have to meet him. We need answers, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the growing storm inside her. You're sure about this? Marcus asked, his brow furrowed. He's powerful, Sarah. Going up against him could be dangerous. I've come this far, Marcus. I'm not turning back now, Sarah replied. We'll meet him, and we'll get the truth. The meeting was set for the following evening at a private office complex downtown. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she prepared for what would undoubtedly be a tense confrontation. She didn't know what Gregory Hughes was capable of, but she couldn't afford to show weakness. She had to go into this knowing that everything was on the line. As she and Marcus entered the sleek, modern building, the air felt heavy with anticipation. They were led to a private conference room where Gregory Hughes was already waiting. He stood by the window, his back to them, his hands clasped behind him as he stared out over the city. Sarah Williams, he said, turning around slowly as they entered. I've heard a lot about you. Impressive career. A woman who knows what she wants. Sarah kept her composure, meeting his gaze with steady resolve. You've been manipulating my team, feeding information to insiders. What do you want, Gregory? He smiled, though there was no warmth in it. What I want? That's a bit of a complicated question, isn't it? But I suppose you could say I want control. Control over what happens next. Sarah felt her stomach twist. Control of what? The airport? You've been playing a dangerous game, Gregory, and you're going to lose. Am I? He replied, his voice smooth, almost patronizing. You've done well, Sarah, but you've been playing by the wrong rules. People like me? We don't play by the rules. And now, you're in the middle of a game that you can't even begin to understand. His words chilled her to the bone. She realized then that this wasn't just about a few leaks. It was about much more. The airport was just the beginning. Hughes had bigger plans, plans that could change the course of an entire industry. I won't let you have control, Sarah said, her voice unwavering despite the fear that threatened to creep in. This ends now. Gregory chuckled darkly. You think you can stop me? You've barely scratched the surface, Sarah. You have no idea how deep this goes. As Sarah and Marcus left the building, the weight of the conversation sank in. Gregory Hughes was powerful, but he wasn't invincible. The war for control of the airport, and much more, was only just beginning. And Sarah Williams? She was no longer just fighting for her career. She was fighting for something much bigger. Her fight wasn't just against one man, or even one network. It was against an entire system that threatened everything she believed in. The stakes had just gotten much higher. The next few days felt like a blur of heightened tension and sleepless nights. Sarah couldn't escape the feeling that everything was about to come crashing down around her. Her encounter with Gregory Hughes had been unsettling, but it had also given her clarity. He wasn't just some rogue businessman trying to take over the airport. He was part of a much larger, far-reaching operation, and now he had made it personal. Sarah's mind raced as she sat in her office late one night, reviewing the mountains of data, messages, and files Marcus had uncovered. The conspiracy wasn't just about the airport anymore. It was about control of an entire industry, about manipulating resources, and about the growing influence of shadowy figures who wanted to reshape everything for their benefit. Sarah wasn't just fighting for her career anymore. She was fighting to expose a dangerous underworld that threatened the very infrastructure of the aviation industry. But how far did it go? How many people were involved? Who could she trust? Marcus's voice broke through her thoughts. Sarah, I think we found something. She looked up sharply. What is it? We found more connections, hidden investments. Hughes has been using front companies to buy up shares in key aviation tech startups. He's been positioning himself for a massive acquisition of airport systems technology. And some of these companies have been on the edge of collapse. Hughes has been offering them bailouts, through us. Sarah's stomach turned. Through us? Yes. The airport system was always meant to be the backbone for Hughes's bigger plans. If he takes control, he can monopolize the entire aviation infrastructure, airports, tech, and logistics. And he's using insider access to steer things his way. Alan was his conduit, but now, he's made you his target. Sarah's eyes narrowed as the pieces finally fell into place. Gregory Hughes didn't just want the airport. He wanted the entire system. The airport's technological backbone, the logistics, the cargo routes, the ticketing systems, everything. If Hughes could control the airport's inner workings, he could control the global flow of aviation data and infrastructure. The implications were staggering. If he succeeded, it would be a game-changer for every industry tied to air travel, from freight companies to airlines. We have to shut him down, Sarah said, her voice cold with resolve. We will, Marcus replied. But this isn't just about us anymore. We need allies. We need to bring in law enforcement, maybe even the FBI. If Hughes is involved in this kind of operation, it's bigger than anything we can handle on our own. Sarah paused, contemplating the risk. Going public with this could blow the lid off the conspiracy, but it could also be the only way to stop Hughes. But the thought of bringing in the authorities made her uneasy. Hughes had power. He had connections. The last thing Sarah wanted was to expose herself and her team to retaliation from the powerful figures behind Hughes's empire. But Marcus was right. This wasn't just about saving the airport anymore. It was about protecting everyone from a corrupt system that had infiltrated the very infrastructure of the aviation world. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother. May, I know you're in the thick of it right now, but I'm proud of you. You've never backed down from a fight, and I know this time won't be any different. Whatever happens, you've already won in my eyes. Just keep your head up. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the words sink in. She'd always been driven by her mother's belief in her, and now more than ever, she needed that strength. She needed to be bold. She needed to outsmart Hughes and bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. The plan was simple, yet dangerous. Sarah and Marcus had gathered enough evidence to show that Gregory Hughes had been orchestrating this entire operation. They had the messages, the connections, the names. Now, it was time to make their move. They called in a trusted ally, a former FBI agent named Rachel Turner, who had a reputation for being a bulldog when it came to uncovering corporate corruption. She had worked with Sarah on a few smaller cases over the years and was someone Sarah trusted implicitly. Rachel arrived the following morning, her expression as serious as ever. "All right, Sarah, what are we looking at?" "We have Gregory Hughes orchestrating a takeover of the airport systems, using a network of insiders to manipulate operations, buy out tech companies, and position himself as the key player in aviation infrastructure. But it's bigger than that. He's been using the airport's data to make global power plays in the aviation industry, and we have the proof," Sarah explained. Rachel nodded, her brow furrowed. "If what you're saying is true, this is huge. I'll need to make some calls. But we can't do this the old-fashioned way, Sarah. We'll need to expose him publicly, get law enforcement involved, and move fast. If Hughes catches wind of this, he'll go underground, and you'll never be able to catch him." Sarah's heart raced at the thought. The idea of a public confrontation sent a chill down her spine, but Rachel was right. If they didn't act now, they could lose everything. "We have to move then. The moment we get confirmation of Hughes's plans, we expose him," Sarah said, her voice firm. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of action. Marcus worked with Rachel to coordinate with various law enforcement agencies, while Sarah prepared the public release of the information. The news would break globally. Hughes's connections, his manipulations, his attempts to hijack the airport systems for personal gain. They had to ensure that the truth came to light and that no stone was left unturned. But there was still a lingering sense of fear in Sarah's chest. Hughes was powerful. He wasn't going to let this go without a fight. If they made one wrong move, he could retaliate in ways that would ruin everything. And yet, Sarah knew that there was no other option. She had to see this through, no matter the cost. The moment of truth arrived. Sarah, Marcus, and Rachel stood in front of a massive conference table in the airport's high-security boardroom. On the screens behind them, the information was ready to be shared. News outlets were on standby, waiting for the signal to go live. Sarah's finger hovered over the button. This was it. This was the moment when everything changed. She turned to Rachel and Marcus. "Are we ready?" Marcus nodded. "Let's do this." "Let's finish this," Rachel added, her expression grim but resolute. Sarah pressed the button. The news broke with the force of an avalanche. Within hours, the world was watching as the full extent of Gregory Hughes's operation came to light. Law enforcement swarmed Hughes's companies, and federal agents began arrests. His plan had been exposed, and his empire of deception crumbled before his eyes. But even as the storm raged around Gregory Hughes, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business. The airport was safe for now, but she knew this wasn't the last time she would face such a challenge. The fight for control, for power, was something that never truly ended. But Sarah had learned something vital. She was willing to do whatever it took to protect her vision, her team, and the airport she had worked so hard to build. And as she stood amidst the chaos, Sarah Williams knew one thing for certain. She would never back down. Not now, not ever. The aftermath of Gregory Hughes's fall was nothing short of seismic. In the days following the public exposure of his network, Sarah had seen the airport's operations grind to a halt as government officials, law enforcement agents, and corporate auditors moved in. What had once been an unstoppable empire of corporate espionage and manipulation now lay in ruins. The airport systems had been freed from Hughes's grip, and the long, drawn-out battle to reclaim control was finally over. But for Sarah, it felt less like a victory and more like the closing of one chapter and the uncertain opening of another. The airport was no longer under threat, but the cost of that victory had been steep. Trust within her team had been shattered. Friendships had been tested, and some had even been lost. The very foundation of the airport's management had been rocked to its core. Sarah sat in her office, staring out the large windows that overlooked the runway. The constant hum of aircraft taking off and landing had once been a source of pride for her. It had been the heartbeat of the city, a symbol of progress, ambition, and hard work. Now, as she watched the planes, it seemed like a quiet reminder of how far she'd come and how much she'd sacrificed. Had it all been worth it? She asked herself. She turned to look at the stack of reports on her desk, audits, new regulations, and countless evaluations. The rebuilding process had already begun, but Sarah couldn't ignore the pang of exhaustion that weighed heavily on her chest. The months of relentless pressure had drained her. The emotional toll of the betrayals, the constant fear of failure, and the intense media scrutiny, it had all left its mark. But even as Sarah contemplated the cost of the journey, a small flicker of hope remained. Her fight had restored the airport, but it had also given her a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to lead, to stand firm, even when the storm rages around you, and to always seek the truth, no matter how difficult the path. The airport needed her more than ever. The system had to be rebuilt, trust had to be restored, and the future had to be secured. But Sarah knew she was no longer the same person she had been when this all began. She was stronger, more determined, and more willing to fight for what was right. As Sarah sat at her desk, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Claire. "Sarah," Claire said softly, standing in the doorway. "There's someone here to see you." Sarah frowned, puzzled. "Who?" "It's Alan," Claire said, her voice cautious. The mention of Alan's name brought a rush of emotions flooding back. He had been the first link in the chain that had unraveled everything. His betrayal had cut deep, and despite his later confession, Sarah wasn't sure how she felt about him anymore. She had always considered him a friend, and now he was standing in front of her, his future uncertain. "Send him in," Sarah said, her voice steady but tinged with wariness. Alan stepped into her office, looking much smaller than he had when Sarah first met him. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, and there was a weariness in his eyes that told Sarah just how far he had fallen. The man who had once been her trusted colleague now looked like someone who had been broken by his own actions. "Sarah," Alan said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't need to explain, Alan," Sarah interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. "I know what happened. I know everything." He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For betraying you. For betraying all of us. I was blinded by ambition, by the idea of power. I thought I could control everything, but I didn't realize how much I was losing in the process." Sarah studied him for a long moment. Part of her wanted to turn away, to reject him completely. He had been a part of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed everything she had worked for. But then, she remembered the person he used to be, the person she had once trusted. He had been lost, just like everyone else who had gotten swept up in Hughes's manipulations. "Do you want redemption, Alan?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet but pointed. Alan's eyes flickered with a mix of shame and determination. "I do. More than anything. I never realized how far I had fallen until it was too late. I want to make things right." There was a long silence. Sarah wasn't sure if she could ever fully trust Alan again, but in that moment, she saw something in him that hadn't been there before. A genuine desire to change, to make amends. She wasn't sure if he deserved another chance, but she also knew that everyone deserved the opportunity to rebuild their lives, if they were willing to put in the work. "If you want to make things right, Alan, you have a long road ahead of you," Sarah said. "This airport, this team, it's been through enough. We've lost trust. We've lost so much already. But if you're willing to do the hard work, we can start from scratch. Just know this, nothing is going to come easy." Alan nodded, his face earnest. "I'll do whatever it takes." The conversation with Alan was the first of many hard decisions that lay ahead. There was much to rebuild. Trust had been shattered, and Sarah knew it would take time before the airport could regain its footing fully. But there was a sense of relief in knowing that, despite everything, she had managed to expose the truth. The wheels of justice were turning. Hughes was behind bars, and his network was crumbling. But there were still pieces to pick up, pieces that had been shattered in the wake of his betrayal. As the days passed, Sarah threw herself into the recovery efforts, rebuilding relationships with her team, reinforcing security measures, ensuring the integrity of the airport's operations. There was much to be done, and she knew it wouldn't be easy. One morning, as Sarah sat in a meeting with Marcus and the rest of her leadership team, her phone buzzed with a new message. She checked it quickly, expecting it to be another update on the recovery process. Instead, it was from her mother. "May, I've been thinking a lot about everything you've been through. It's hard to watch you fight so much, but I know you're stronger than anything life throws at you. Just remember to take a breath, okay? You're doing good work, but don't lose yourself in the process." The words hit her with the force of a realization. In all the chaos, in all the battles for control, Sarah had pushed so hard. She had fought so fiercely, but maybe it was time to find balance again. Later that afternoon, Sarah took a break and stepped outside onto the observation deck. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the airport as the planes glided through the sky. She breathed in deeply, feeling the cool wind on her face. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a moment of peace. The airport had been through hell and back, but it had survived. And so had she. In that quiet moment, Sarah realized something important. The fight was never really over. There would always be new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But as long as she had her team, her strength, and her vision, she knew she could face anything. The future of the airport was in her hands, and Sarah Williams was ready for whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?